evening and welcome to ELOSOFUMARTAKES. This is our 160th take, live from the Alec Bradley Lone Star Studios of Euless, Texas. I'm your host, Barry Duplessis, as always, and I'm so proud, so pleased, and so privileged to be with you all tonight. This is going to be a fantastic show, a show of epic proportions. I know I say this a lot, and I know that I get really excited about my guests, but I am super excited about tonight's show. This has been a conversation that I've wanted to have for actually a very long time, and I'm pleased that everyone can join. But before we get to formal introductions of the guests of honor, do have to thank the people that make this show possible, and that, of course, is our sponsors. Tonight's show is sponsored, of course, by Drew Estate. Drew Estate announced last month the new wooden boxes for the Undercrown brand beginning last month. The new box design looks almost identical to the award-winning current design, and the boxes continue to contain 25 cigars. The major difference and improvement lies in the shelf-friendly, compact format, which enables premium cigar retailers and you, or for those of you at home who are blessed to have an in-home humidor, more space for your favorite Undercrown cigars. Favorite Undercrown cigar lines include Maduro, Shade, and Sun-Grown, while the boxes of the Flying Pig, Corona Pequeña, or others remain unchanged. But fit more of your favorite underground cigars today inside of your humidor thanks to Drew Estate. And tonight's show is also sponsored by Oveja Negra Brands, 4 unique companies who share a passion to provide innovative cigars for the next generation of cigar enthusiasts. Black Label Trading Company, Blackwork Studio, Dissident, and Emilio are combining premium tobacco with an artisanal touch. Oveja Negra, where arts and tobacco collide. Join the flock and visit ovejanegracigars.com to learn more. And welcome, everybody. It's our 160th take. So without further ado, let's introduce tonight's guest of honor, sponsored by United Cigars. Smoke one today. Start living united. Amanda Micallef of Micallef Cigars. Amanda, how are we doing tonight?
So excited to be here, Bear. Thank you for having me. And that was quite a welcome. I appreciate it.
Oh, the pleasure is absolutely all mine. Like I said before, I'm super excited about this opportunity to sit down with you. This is a conversation that I've wanted to have for quite a while. It's something that our good mutual friend Dan Thompson and I had kind of chatted about it. And when we kind of came up with the idea of having you on the show, I got super excited. And I know I'm gonna keep saying that a couple times tonight. Not nervous at all, but just so much I want to talk to you about, and I just don't know if I've got the time, and I'm certainly sure you don't. So, but kind of let's kick stuff off like we normally do here on ELOSOFUMARTAKES, which is the standard. What are we smoking tonight? So, Amanda, what do you got lit up there?
Well, we're smoking a Medallia. I'm a 4x46 smoker usually, but I know that these conversations with you tend to be kind of robust, so I decided to go all the way up to 6x46 this evening. But Medallia is my favorite Micallef blend, and it's also, it's Women's History Month, so I thought it was an appropriate blend to grab tonight as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I was wondering if it was the SE or not that you were smoking tonight. So.
Well, this SE is sold out, and so until we get them into the hands of everybody, we've decided to not break into the few that we held back for the office. So, we're all anxiously waiting for the moment we can all light up again.
Awesome. People of integrity. I like it. For you, and you guys have done that. You guys have done that with several projects. I know that the same thing was happening with the cigar that I'm smoking tonight, which is the Micallef A, which is of course made in honor of your ambassadors, which is of course the community that you all founded and started. Fans and supporters of your brand call themselves the Micallef ambassadors, and that is what this project was made in honor of. So
that is a fun smoke. It was a fun project to name it with them. To really see the conversation happen.
I have to say, like, this is still like, and shockingly, when you consider one, just how incredibly friendly it is for the budget conscious, but just considering the size of the scope of your portfolio, it's still one of my most enjoyable cigars from your portfolio. I'm definitely an Experiencia La Crema guy. Like that's my jam.
A wonderful smoke.
But this cigar is just truly fabulous. So
now, have you gotten your hands on a lowercase a yet? The small ones?
No, I haven't. No, I haven't yet, but I'm excited. I'm excited to try that Vitola for it.
It's great. It's great. I actually, and maybe I tend to like a smaller ring gauge, but I love the one you're smoking, and I've become quite a fan of the lowercase a too. It's a good stick.
I do have something else fun that I'm going to be smoking later tonight. It's I don't hate teasing the audience, but there's a gift from our mutual friend Dan Thompson. So
Mm-hmm.
and undisclosed, but he gave it to me and he asked me to smoke it. So I'll be honored to smoke it tonight with you.
Good.
Uh,
That'll be fun.
But as we kind of dive into I was really, I mean, we're going to get into your vast background here in just a little bit. But one of the things that I was really pleased to learn about you was actually we share a fan of literary works, particularly one in particular that that I thought was a really cool and would love to talk about it today was To Kill a Mockingbird is actually your favorite book.
Yes.
Which I believe you even named a family friend,
yes.
four-legged friend, after one of the characters.
So my dog, which some people watching tonight might know, the ambassadors have become familiar with Scout, but Scout is a little Spitfire, and she's named after Scout in Kill a Mockingbird.
Absolutely one of my favorite characters in literature. I think she is phenomenal. Very
well. She's our conscience, right? And
yes.
She's got that such a pure way of looking at the world. And I part of what I love about that book is that, it really reminds you that none of us are born with preconceived negative ideas or racism, judgment, misogyny, any of those things. The characters, the kids, are so pure at heart. And then you really get to see them juxtaposed against the people in the town that are not. And I just think it's a great reminder to try to, return back to your younger self when you're encountering new people.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. I think that one of the most powerful scenes in literature, let alone also in film, the way it's depicted, later, obviously later with Gregory Peck starring as Scout's father, which I'm a big Gregory Peck fan, as I was telling you before the show. But the scene outside the jailhouse when she starts calling out like the fellow townspeople by name because she knows them. And
yes.
she's like, it's just so shocking.
Yeah.
Like she's talking to them like, how are you, Mr. Peterson? And like, how's little Jimmy doing? And it's just, they all kind of recognize their own humanity for a second and are felt with and should be felt with just utter shame, and disgust.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a very sobering moment. And, it's an incredible book. And it's one of the things that's so interesting is also it's not very long, and they managed to really, it resonates so much in its short length. And that's always sort of resonated with me, that you don't need 1,000 pages to tell a great story. You can, if you just hit the right moments.
No, I completely agree. I think it is those moments. Just, I mean, just to be, above it and philosophical for a second, like it is those moments that kind of tell the story of our lives. If you look back and be like, what defines Amanda? What defines Bear? And you look back and you're like, well, that was a watershed moment right there, and that was too. And you can almost grab these little
yes.
sections of your life that kind of have defined you as a person.
Yes.
Which is interesting. Speaking of memories, I understand that one of your fondest memory was when you were a child. You got to spend some really have very unique experiences with your father, like who would actually take you on these trips. Play
we did.
unofficially hooky, I guess, from school.
Often, yes.
Statute of limitations is over, so I guess the principal can't get you in trouble anymore. But what were
we did.
what were some of your favorites? Yeah, go. What were some of your favorites there?
I mean, it's funny. I don't remember necessarily like a single trip as a favorite. It boils down to more moments, and they almost always really are like life lessons in a sense. And some of them were just survival lessons. So like I have a very distinct memory of traveling with my dad and being on a plane. And this is back when you still got a full meal on an airplane, but airplane food was also particularly bad. And so, I'm probably 7 years old and he's teaching me how to survive airplane food, right down to how you can manage to make a root beer float on a plane. And there was ice cream for dessert, and maybe we made a Coke float. I don't know if they had root beer. And he, asked the stewardess for, a soft drink. And, he was sitting there and he cooked up a, root beer float. And, and he was always doing things like that just, whether it was, he would have me at a young age go and learn to exchange money in a new country, or he just never, ever assumed because I was a kid that I couldn't do something. And he really allowed me to believe I was on my own. In hindsight, I'm sure he was 10 feet behind me, keeping very close watch. But, he really, really set me up in a way to believe that I could take care of myself and that, I didn't need to, ask permission or for an adult to do things that, when you're traveling or out in the world, you have to be able to think for yourself and take action and take steps and not be afraid to talk to people or ask questions. And it was such an incredible foundation. But one of the funnier things that happened is he did take me over to England. And it was my first time to the United Kingdom. And we were going to do some sightseeing. At the time, he had, I think it still does, he had a company over in the United Kingdom that was the headquarters for his silicone manufacturing company for all of Europe. And they were having a board meeting. And so, we were going to do sightseeing, but day one, we have to go off to the office. And so off to the office we go, and they start the board meeting, and I'm sitting in a chair in the corner, and I have jet lag. And so probably 10 or 15 minutes into the meeting, I fall asleep. And I wake up at the end of the board meeting, and they're just wrapping things up. And I look around at this table full of adults and say, well, now I understand why they call it a board meeting. It's because they're really boring. That was my final say on board meetings until about 20 years later. But I didn't realize, they thought it was very funny. At the time, I had no idea what they were laughing at. Obviously now I completely get it, and they are sometimes boring. But we had a good time. His other rule was I could go anywhere with him as long as I could pack in a carry-on bag.
There you
which
go.
is still a life skill I have. I could go for many, many weeks in a carry-on bag.
I'm a horrible packer. Just awful. And I would, for a long time before I met my wife, I would take way too much on an airplane, way too much on trips and everything, which is kind of, stereotypically speaking,
Yes,
opposite,
the woman's role.
the opposite.
I know.
Yeah. But my wife slowly has trained me over a little over 10 years of marriage to forego that habit. And I'll tell you what, it makes traveling so much less
It
stressful.
does. Right. Yeah, no, I'm ready. I always laugh because whenever I travel with guys, I always have the smallest bag.
That's awesome.
But it's just, I would rather park smart and not have pack smart and not have to lug all that crap and deal with it. So.
Oh, absolutely. You actually deliver a perfect segue into tonight's major point. So with the board meetings quip. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get the major points started. Which tonight's point is always brought to you by Barrico Cigar Company. Barrico is back, getting ready for the relaunch of the Voyage this spring. I personally can't wait for the cigar to come back. It's been over 3 years, but now with a revamped blend coming out of one of the hottest factories in the industry, Danny Vasquez promises if you like the original blend, you're going to absolutely love this relaunch. So stay tuned for more details on how you can enjoy the Voyage and never settle. Barrico Cigar Company. So, like I said, perfect segue, man. The major point I want to get into has a lot to do with your story, which is quite vast, including the amount of, as boring as you found them as a child, you sit on 5 boards. And one we actually, because I actually haven't, I asked for the fact check at the beginning of it, and you're like, well, actually it's 4. Well, never mind, it is actually 5 still. So we've got, and if I mispronounce it, I apologize, but we got Jamek.
Totally okay.
J-Mac, excuse me. The Riata Restaurant.
Yes.
Sierra Lorana. Micallef Cigars, and Element, which is the parent company for your Project Arsenic, which we'll talk about a little bit. My word. So how do you do it? Is it Red Bull? Is it coffee? What's the secret? how do you keep going?
Well, first off, I think it's fun. I truly, genuinely I enjoy work. I enjoy the people that I get to work with. I enjoy the opportunities. And by opportunities, I mean, the challenges and problems and the things that come up. They're always super interesting. The businesses themselves are very different, which I do think makes a big difference, because it's not as if you're focusing on the same sort of thing every day. It's constantly different.
Mhm.
And, I spend an enormous amount of time with J Mac and Micallef Cigars. Up until late 2019, most of my time was spent with Elemental and Arsenic. And so then you're sort of, you're on a more high level view of the other businesses. And I think that balance is important too. When you're in the weeds too much, it's easy to miss sometimes something that's kind of right in front of your face. And so I think it's always important to have people that are really, really entrenched in the day to day, and then also have, a group of people that understand the business very well, but don't necessarily get into the weeds so much, because then they can come in and hear an overview or bring a new perspective to something that's going on, that it's just hard to do when you're in the day to day. And so I think what keeps me going is just that, I'm super interested in all of them. I tend to look at all of them through the same lens. I mean, mostly what I'm contributing is, marketing based information and things like that, and content and consumer based, because that's kind of my experience. But always through the lens of that company, and so it stays fresh, which keeps it fun and exciting, and you kind of want to dig in.
And you said that, keep it fresh is probably definitely the most adequate way you could describe all these ventures that you're involved in, because they kind of span the breadth of industry, really. I mean, you have, everything from restaurant to real estate to technology to cigars. That's a pretty big buckshot if I've ever seen one.
It's funny. It feels like
And
it's all over the
entertainment
map.
and entertainment too.
Yes, but at their core, they they're family, and family that extends to the people that work there, and then the people that interact with the product, whatever the product may be, is really resonant in all of them. And so, they're all very much sort of community based. I mean, take Riata, for example. It's a restaurant, but in Fort Worth, it's almost like the people's restaurant. I mean, it years ago, it sort of ceased being the Micallef families, and it sort of became the city of Fort Worth. And in that way, you're always thinking about, how does this affect, the people that spend their birthdays and their anniversaries and their graduations with us. And that's not very different, really, than thinking about, how do we, think about our next cigar release, and how does that have an effect on our ambassadors? And, in Sierra Leone is real estate, but every decision we make is going to affect the people that choose to live there. And so, it becomes, it seems broad and vast, but it becomes very simple when you really sort of stop thinking about what it is specifically they do, and just think about kind of, the core of them. And really at their core is community, always.
Which certainly stems a theme right into, obviously, the major point that brought us together tonight, which is, of course, Micallef Cigars, which we'll get into here shortly. But I kind of wanted to start from the beginning here a little bit, if you don't mind. So we already talked about some of your adventures as a young child with your father, and actually I want to actually, before we digress, I do want to kind of hit on that point when you're talking about Riata. It actually, that's I don't think I've ever had it. I don't think anyone's ever described it more perfectly. That it is the people's restaurant of Fort Worth, because I went to couple proposals there. I witnessed there, not mine, obviously. I've only proposed once. But I witnessed a couple of proposals there of friends of mine, celebrated countless birthdays and anniversaries, a bunch of graduations, going to TCU, celebrations were done there. I mean, it really is kind of like a memory point that's entrenched on so many people, and in such a large community, because Fort Worth is a huge city.
It is, it wasn't by design to be honest, when Dad decided to start to put the original Riata in Fort Worth. We had built one in Alpine. He put it on the 35th story of a building in downtown Fort Worth before anybody did that, and I thought he was out of his mind. But he has a sixth sense for what people want, and people very quickly started coming. And I think it was just because it felt like you were eating in your living room. It was a nice restaurant, but no pretension. And I think that really stems from who Al is. That he comes from a very humble beginnings. He's still a big kid at heart, and he still sort of can't believe that he gets to do all the things that he gets to do, and that really permeates anything he invests time and even capital into. And I think because he spent so much time down there, and it was his friends, and it just rippled out to then friends of friends and friends of friends, and everybody was within X degrees of sort of that core group, that people just thought about it as their restaurant, and that magic stayed. And I wish I could write the formula, but I don't think you can, and any more than you could write down like what makes the ambassador group at Micallef special. And it's not us at headquarters, it's the ambassadors, it's the people. And I think ultimately what made Riata special was that it was a Fort Worth restaurant through and through, and our original chef was from Fort Worth, and the person who was Al's partner and managing and starting it, who he was from Fort Worth. And so everybody had a tie to it. It wasn't like a corporate restaurant that came in and sent some people from New York or Chicago to open up this restaurant in Texas. And I think that's why people felt so at home there. And now after 20 something years, we're probably into the second or third generation in some ways of people, but they grew up there. And so it does feel like home.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, I mean, yeah, contextually, I mean, it's been 20 years since I've been in college, and that's, I mean, it was pretty much right towards the beginning of your founding, and just like, yeah, all these memories. Now people I went to college would take their kids, and
right.
Yeah,
It's Michael will say, tell me so-and-so's going to their high school graduation party, and it'll be my friend's children. And I'm like, how is that possible? But you blink and 20 years goes by. But I do think that's why that it does feel very much like it's the city's restaurant, because a generation of people now have had major events there. Almost you'd be hard pressed to find somebody who didn't go to a reception or a graduation party or something.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it was funny. I was among the many accomplishments we're about to get into of yours, I was telling my wife a little bit about you when she asked me who I was interviewing tonight, and I was like, so you mentioned, of course, the Riata, and she's like, "Oh, do you think she can get us a table there?" Kind of half joking, and I said, I can get us a table there. And she's like, "Oh, how?" And I'm like, "Well, the phone will probably be the efficient tool for me." But yeah, no, yeah, it's one of those things, like you said, it's just one of those things that has those memories entrenched in us, and it's really cool to be a part of a project that way, and actually many of your projects actually are that way. So to go down that original path I wanted to go to, let's talk a little bit about from the beginning. So, you mentioned, we mentioned your adventures as a child and everything, and then this. So, I mean, if you want to start anywhere else, but I mean, as far back as I could, could go back with you, it sounded like you wanted to do stuff in production, right? So I mean, you were doing film and commercial television. I mean, Hollywood did it always call to you, or was it something that just kind of happened?
It was kind of something that happened. When I was in high school, so I'm going to go way back. I started working in production for theater. I didn't have any desire to be on stage. I've always preferred to be behind the scenes, but I got very, very involved with theater and production. And I think part of what drew me to it, I was a terrible student, but my best friend wanted to try out for this play. And so because I'm in high school, so of course you do everything your best friend does. And so I went with her, and I, started working backstage, and kind of naturally fell into stage managing and some of the, sort of behind the scenes things. And it turned out that I kind of just had I don't know, figuring out how to organize people. I never really gave it any thought. I was good at it. Like, I just sort of knew how to do it. I don't know how, but it came very naturally to me. And it saved high school for me in a lot of ways, because I went to a pretty competitive high school. And not being a great student when, half your class goes to Ivy League schools, high school can be a challenging experience when you don't sort of fit into that group of people. And being part of this group and excelling in, sort of the stage managing aspect really kind of gave me a spot, if you will. And through that experience, when I got to be a senior in high school, we always had this internship program, and you were supposed to spend the month of April in the afternoons interning. And I was pretty bored my senior year, like most seniors are. You kind of are done with school, you have senioritis. And a movie was shooting near our ranch in West Texas. And I went and talked the school into letting me take the month of February off to go work on this movie. And I mean, and I did it, like, in hindsight, I still can't believe I did it. I told the movie production company that my high school said it was fine if it was okay with them. Hadn't talked to my high school yet. Then I told my principal, all my teachers said it was okay if it was okay with my principal. And then I told the teachers, the principal said it was okay if it was okay with them. And somehow I pulled this off. I'm sure they all knew I was full of crap, but they let me go. And I was like 4 days into working on a movie, and I had never worked such long. I mean, you start, especially when you're an intern, you start at 5 a.m. and you get done at 10 p.m. And
right.
Like, and every day, the first week, I would look at my watch at around 3 or 3:30 for the first time. And I wasn't looking at my watch because I was bored or thinking when is this day was going to be over. I was just curious what time it was. Mm-hmm. And about the fourth day in, I realized that if I could start at 5 a.m. and not even think about what time it is until 3:30 in the afternoon, that something about that was right. And so I sort of started thinking, okay, this is what I want to do. And so I spent the rest of the month kind of figuring out what I might want to do in that world. But I was completely hooked. And so I kind of narrowed it down to either producing or working kind of as an assistant director, and really kind of became enamored with the idea of producing, because it starts with the story, and you really see something from the very, very beginning all the way through to the end. And that really resonated with me. And so that was sort of when I got bit by the bug. And so it wasn't something that I had necessarily spent my whole life thinking about, but once I was in, and there was nothing else mattered. It was just, how do I get to do this again?
So I'm sorry if I missed it. I was just captured by the intern and leaving high school to go do this work on this movie. What was the name of the movie, or did you not want to disclose it?
I did not say. It was Larry McMurtry. It was a TV movie. It was a miniseries for Larry McMurtry, Streets of Laredo, which is the prequel to Lonesome Dove.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, so that was a lot of fun. But I mean, and I had grown up watching Lonesome Dove, which had probably been made maybe 10 years before that, although I have no sense of time. But I mean, Lonesome Dove was a staple, especially in our household, but I think for a lot of Texans. And so it was a very sort of known entity. But McMurtry wrote a prequel and a sequel, and they were shooting the prequel, and it was a 4-hour miniseries. But so I shot that, and I was supposed to go back at the end of February to school, and they actually asked if I wanted to go with them to finish the movie. There was 10 more shooting days. So I just decided not to go back to school. Didn't tell them, just didn't show up for 10 days in March. And now you're cut to, I'm a senior in high school, I'm 18 years old, and now I'm not staying on my family ranch, showing up on whatever set. They're taking me with them. I have my own hotel room. They're giving me per diem. I mean, I thought I had arrived. Little did I know, but it was a pretty exciting thing for me at the time.
Dan Thompson's in the chat, and he's like, just a little project, prequel to Lonesome Dove, no big deal. Yeah. No, pretty impressive. Man, that must have been a blast. Sounds like it.
It was a lot of fun. And a lot of the people I worked with on that are still very good friends. And I didn't realize at the time what an incredible gift they gave me, and how generous everybody was with their time. People really, really took time out of their day to spend with me and talk to me about what they did and what their piece of, the project was and how they approached it. And it wasn't until years later that I really realized what an incredible view of the entire process that I got. that a lot of people, I think because I was an intern, people really thought, okay, she's here to learn. And so they really took time to teach me, as opposed to, if you actually just get hired on as a production assistant, you have such a specific role. No one stops and gives you the context of the big picture necessarily. And I think it can take a lot longer to really understand the foundation. And since I was sort of an extra person, I wasn't taking on a role that they needed somebody to be doing, that I did help, but I also had the time and the flexibility to spend, a few days with almost every department, which is really awesome.
So I'm going to admit that I cheated a little bit here. Now I knew, for the record, I knew James Garner and I knew Sissy Spacek, but let's this is just the cast. Okay. I just want to kind of put some reference for people. Ned Beatty, Sam Shepard, Randy Quaid, Wes Studi, George Carlin was actually in it, Kevin Conway, and James Gammon. Some of the best, greatest actors and actresses. It's a great screen the last 50 years. And some of the James Gammon is probably one of my favorite character actors of all time. Like, I just
he's amazing.
Love that. Were your friendships more on the production side, like behind the camera, or did you actually get acquainted with any of the talent, so to speak?
Well, I was fortunate in that I got to meet some of the. I got to meet Willie. You get to meet the talent. I wouldn't say I got to know any of them particularly well. What was interesting about that group of people is, all of them were incredibly well established and had all been acting a very long time. And I often said, sort of the more famous you are and the longer you've been acting in front of the camera, the more humble you are. And they were all incredibly kind and generous and kind to the entire crew. And all the, I didn't see any of the bad behavior that you hear about or see in Hollywood at all on actually the first several movies that I worked on, because they were very similar in that they were very known, established, but older actors, and there was none of that crazy partying and bad behavior and people locking themselves in trailers and things like that. I had a incredible experience. I just got to work with a lot of professionals, probably my first 3 or 4 years. And in different movies, sometimes it just depends. Sometimes you get to know cast better than others, and some of it depends on how on those big miniseries, a lot of times they bring their family with them, and so they tend to be out with the crew less. But more often than not, the actors that I worked with throughout my career were really genuine, generous people. Very rarely did I run into any of the kind of Hollywood behavior that people roll their eyes at. It exists, but of course, but it's not nearly as prevalent as you would think on the day-to-day. Most people are professionals. They show up, they do their job. It's great. That's
awesome. Now, there are a couple of other projects that you worked on later on as your career became more established. You actually got a special nod. No credit, no formal credit at least, but a special nod for a documentary called The Danger Zone. It was about the making of Top Gun that I saw.
That makes me laugh, because the way that it shows up sometimes in credits is it just shows up as like, I'm part of the crew on the original Top Gun, which is laughable because I would have been like 12 years old. And so I always find that one very funny. But I worked with Barry Tubb, who actually was the director of the first movie I produced. And Barry was Hollywood in Top Gun. And so when they came back to shoot the 25th anniversary edition, they shot that documentary. And it was when we were in post on the movie that we had made together. And so I was helping just coordinate schedules. And I think they ended up shooting his interview at our production office. And I still don't know why they were so kind as to sort of put my name in as a special nod, but they did. But it's always funny because it makes my career look like it was a 15 years longer or 20 years longer than it really
was. So, speaking, you got into producing, as we kind of talked about, like one of the projects that you worked on, probably it might have been, and you please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong here, but it might have been your swan song as far as Hollywood production is concerned. It was the project that you work on with Chad Fehan or Fehan.
Fehan, yes.
Yeah, he wrote and directed the Beneath the Dark, right?
Yes,
which you produced.
yes,
What was that your
I
last
did.
was that your last project in Hollywood, so to speak, in terms of film?
It was my last. It was the last film that I produced. It also was something, Chad and I had partnered on several films, and it was the first movie he directed. He wrote it. We developed the story. It is completely his brilliant idea and story, but I was part of every single step of that and every draft and all those things. So it's probably the thing that's nearest to my heart, just because, usually even as a producer, you're often picking up a script that's already been written. So to truly work on something from the kernel of an idea all the way through, finishing the film, taking it to South by Southwest, selling the movie, having it come out, was awesome. It was great, and it was incredible. And then to do that with Chad, was and still is a very good friend, also from Fort Worth. And so to do that with somebody that you've known for so long, and our parents are friends. I mean, it was an incredible experience.
Yeah, I follow his career just a tad. I mean, the name jumped out at me because I'm a big fan of Ray Donovan and Southland, which he was a
Yes,
producer
I
on
had
as well.
yes, yes. hmm
So
hmm
uh,
Chad is an incredible. He's an incredible talent, and he coming off of Beneath the Dark, he started to get a lot of interest as a writer on some series, and so off of that movie, he picked up Southland and Ray Donovan, and he's such a incredible leader as well as writer. And a lot of writers are very talented, but they're more introverted, and they're a little, and so you don't often find a writer who has produced, who has directed, and who also has the leadership skills that he has. And so in every job he's ever had, they very quickly promote him, you know and so he continues to be a writer, but he always ends up being part of the on-set producing staff, because the higher ups recognize that they have a real find for somebody who can quickly make script changes and work with actors, but also that the crew wants to really follow. And so he's had a very quick rise, on the TV side of things, and it's a name you will continue to see. I'm so proud of him, and it could not happen to a nicer guy.
it's really awesome. I mean, just to kind of think, like you said, in the relatively short period of time, the elbows that you rubbed with, and not just rubbed with, but the influence that you had, kind of led to the impact of kind of I guess the thing that kind of really kind of took off for you, which was this project called Arsenic, um, and that was started in was
It
it
was
2015 or 2016?
gosh, I think 2015.
Okay.
Forgive me. It was a lot of times. It's funny. I recently was talking to some startup entrepreneurs, and they sort of said, "Well, what's the origin story?" And I was like, "Well, I don't know if you can call, most people have a startup and they intend to start a business. And with Arsenic, I didn't intend to start anything. It was just a hobby that sort of snowballed into a business that snowballed and pivoted 9 different ways. But what really happened is, I think one of the things no one ever talks about is that most people, if you're lucky, you find yourself in a career and you pick the thing that you want to do, and you're working doing it every day. But there's this funny thing happens, that as you become successful, sometimes you get further and further away from what you loved. You hear a lot of times, like fashion designers or other creative directors will start out actually designing clothes or housewares or whatever, and then they're successful, so they get promoted and promoted again, and suddenly they're overseeing all these other designers, but they don't actually get to design anything anymore. And that's a little of what happened to me. I loved making independent movies, and part of what I loved about it was you had this tight, close-knit group of people, and it was super collaborative, and you got to be on set, and everybody was contributing ultimately to the story and this vision. And it's ultimately the director's vision, but when done well, film is incredibly collaborative, and everybody is coming up with ideas to try to figure out how you're going to convey the emotion in this moment, that you want to get across, especially in independent film on a fixed budget and all these things. And I loved it. I didn't really know that's what I loved about it. I thought I just loved the film business. But working with Chad, who, as I said, was a great talent, and we found some great stories, and we were fortunate to work with some great writers, many of whom he went to AFI with, and we started setting up these movies at, that with bigger and bigger producers at studios. And for a producer, that's the dream. I mean, you're driving through the gates of Universal to go to a meeting with, the producer who owns the Ted franchise. I mean, that's everything you should want. I hated it, because you end up, all you're doing is taking meetings and talking about making movies, and you have actors in these meetings that are huge names, and you can't believe you're sitting there and they're pitching you to play the lead in your movie. But all I wanted to do was get back on set, and it was just getting further and further away. And so I thought, I'm either going to quit the film business, or I have to find a way to get back on set while I'm pursuing these projects that seem to be forever in this limbo of getting the right director and getting the right actor. So I called up a friend of mine who was an agent at CAA, and he had, we had stayed very good friends. We hadn't really worked together a lot because he had gone very, very studio. And I mean, he was, on Steven Spielberg's team and Eva Longoria's team. I mean, he worked with the cream of the crop. But we had stayed very friendly, even though we weren't necessarily, we were true friends instead of Hollywood work friends. And he had a cool house in the Hollywood Hills. And I just said, look, I got to shoot something. You've got a great house. Can I please come and do a shoot there? And he's like, yeah, I'm never there anyway. Just, swing by the office, grab my keys. You can use my house anytime. And my plan was to do a bunch of still photo shoots. I had worked on a commercial that I had produced. And there was a still aspect to it. I had never worked with still photographers before. But I remember thinking that day, oh, shooting stills like this is just like, it's like I'm shooting a mini film, but you don't have all the post-production costs that you would have with a film. So this I could do on the weekend and still pursue my films. And so I get on set, and we start the first photo shoot. And very quickly, I realized that still photography in that realm is nothing like film. It couldn't be less collaborative. Women, we were shooting with female models. The photographer showed up. He told him where to stand. He told him what to wear. He told him what to think, how to act. And he didn't care what any of us had to say. And I was like, well, this is not at all what I wanted. So I started talking to some of the models, and I was like, do you ever want to have more of a say in what you do in photo shoots and things like that? And they all were like, well, yeah, but that just doesn't happen. I mean, it's up to the photographer. I was like, I don't know why that has to be. Like, everybody was there for free. We were just having fun. So I asked some of the models is there a shoot you want to do? I would produce it for you and we could work on the creative together. And they were like, sure. And so that's what I started doing. And it kind of blew up. And all of a sudden, a lot of these models were telling their other model friends, you should work with this girl. She'll do whatever you want, creatively. And Instagram was just starting to become a thing. And so we started sharing the images on Instagram, and it just kind of blew up. And all of a sudden, I'm at dinner with my friend, and he's asking whose house I'm using. He's asking me how it's going. And the waitress overhears him, and she stops, turns around, and I had named it arsenic, but only because I wanted to be able to call up friends and say, do you want to do this? And I wanted some clear delineation between my movie work and my for free still work. And she stopped and turned around and she goes, wait, you're arsenic? And I'm like, how have you heard of this? She's like, everyone's heard of it, which was insane. A small set of people in LA had heard of it. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is a thing. I'm going to start a magazine. And I meant a print magazine. And thank goodness my friend said, that's the dumbest idea I've ever heard. Print is dying. What are you doing? And I'm pretty stubborn. So I said, well, I'm going to do it with or without you. So if you think it's a terrible idea, tell me it's a good idea. And he thought about it and he came back a week later and he said, you should start something on social media. And it should work like a magazine, except that you and I are always complaining about the fact that 7 people get to decide what movies get made. And on social media, it doesn't have to be that way. And we really started playing around with this concept that you could create content and put it out on social media, and based on how people reacted to it, you could sort of use it as votes. And so we started kind of doing photo shoots with this idea that anybody watching could like and comment, and that would be sort of, kind of decide how we kind of kept just choosing who to shoot with. And then we decided that there was no reason why we had to keep it local. And so we started putting out on Instagram if you're doing photo shoots in your town and the hashtag had just started. And I mean, when I say just started, I had to call a friend and say, what does it mean when you put that pound sign in front of things?
Yeah,
Like that's
for us, it's a
was.
pound sign. I know. For everyone else, it's a hashtag.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, no, 100%.
It is, but I mean, that's how new this idea was. But I knew if you put that pound in front of it, it was like searchable. And so we started telling people to, tag arsenic, and people slowly started submitting, and then we would choose some of those and repost them. And then it just kind of created this flywheel. And all of a sudden people were telling people, and they were seeing this, and they're like, what's this thing? And, it kind of in about 6 months became, arguably the first social media magazine. Still not a business in my mind, very much still the thing we were doing on the side. And then I started having kids, and by kids I mean like UCLA and USC kids reach out, students, and they were like, I want to be part of what you're doing. And I'm like, I'm not doing anything. What are you talking about? They're like, no, I want to be part of this. And I'm like, there's no this. I don't have a checkbook. They're like, we don't care. And so they would come to my production office where I would be doing my movie work during the week. And they would just sort of sit at a table in my office, and they would go through Instagram and talk to people and set up shoots. And one of those students came one day, and my friend at CAA had stayed very active with it, and he would come when he could. And she came to us on a weekend when we were shooting, and she's like, you guys should get on Snapchat. And this is when Snapchat had just reinvented itself with stories. But my only understanding of Snapchat was it was the sexting app where, you could send somebody a picture and it disappears. And I'm like, why would we want to be on that? She's like, no, there's this new thing where you can make stories with little film clips. And I'm telling you, it's going to be huge. So we started playing with it, and we did the behind the scenes of one of our photo shoots, and people started watching. And I mean, 2,000 or 3,000 people watched the first day, and we're like, wow, that's interesting. So we did it the next day, and 8,000 people watched that day. And we're like, this is crazy. And so the next weekend we did it again, and the audience doubled. And all of a sudden we have 15,000 people watching our behind the scenes of a photo shoot. But we also both had to go back to work the next day. And so we didn't know what to do. And we came up with this idea that we would just convince one of the women shooting with us to take the account. And she's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, well, I don't know. We have all these people watching. We don't want them to stop watching. So just, here's our username. Here's our password. Just sign in and just take them, do, a day in the life. And we're like, you'll just take over our Snapchat. And I guess that was the first first takeover anyone had ever done. And our Snapchat account blew up. We were very quickly the biggest non-celebrity, biggest company account. Snapchat was calling MTV and, people like that and saying, you guys have to try this takeover thing. And it just snowballed. And all of a sudden we looked at each other and we're like, is this a business? And then, 6 months later, he left CAA. I kind of wrapped up my movie projects, and, arsenic it was a business, but it was such a backwards way to be in a business that, it took us probably 2 years to actually clean up all there was no foundation. There was no business plan. So it took a while to kind of right the ship from just hobby to actually what's our business model?
What's the mission here? Yeah.
Correct. Which was crazy, but I think it was a blessing too, because a lot of what we were doing was pretty unheard of. And if we had done that with an actual intention, especially an intention of making money, I think people would have smelled a rat. And it was so authentic because we had no intention of it. Billy had a great career. I was doing fine. So we didn't need it to be how we were going to pay our bills. And so we had all this time to just experiment and kind of be true to the voice that we wanted. And the voice we wanted really was about women creating the content they wanted instead of what other people told them to do. And I don't believe it ever would have worked. Even if we wrote the business plan for what it ultimately became, I don't think it would have worked if we had started out with the intention of it being a business. It worked because it was always just about a group of people having fun together.
This is what I love about these conversations, Amanda, because when I first started this conversation, or where I thought I was going to go was, Oh, well, arsenic eventually becomes the foundation of what we're about to talk about with Micallef Cigars and some of the things that you guys are doing there as a company. But in reality, it actually stems back further than that. When you were talking about the thing that you love the most in this world was the collaboration, the collaborative effort of creative minds on the movie set itself. Here's the question that I have leading into arsenic being, this hobby that eventually became this business and everything. Do you feel like these students that came to you and everything, like and you, that you obviously mentored and brought along the way? um, Bob Aiken was asking about this. Like, how do you think? How did you feel like this mentorship brought along this new generation of young minds into the entertainment workforce? Like, how do you think that molded them?
Yeah, what I think happened was that Arsenic as an Instagram and eventually a Snapchat channel was provocative, but it was the first time, and so it had, and women were the focal point, and we also had a lot of women photographers. And if you were a female creative, even today, but especially going back, 5, 6, 7 years, there were fewer women, and there still are, in if you're in film school or even in art school, in those sort of leadership roles, those directors, the cinematographers, producers. And so they would stumble onto this account that was edgy and provocative. And at first glance, you might assume that there were a lot of men behind it. And then they would sort of start, peeling back the layers, or they would watch a Snapchat and they would hear somebody talking, and you know, they would really start to understand that, wait a second, there's a bunch of women behind this thing. And that, so a lot of, because our people were always surprised to find out that all of our interns were women. And people always thought this would be like every guy in the world wants to work on a set with a bunch of girls, right? But it was always women. And I think that they were just surprised to find a safe space where women could do, I can I swear on your channel, Bear? Because
Absolutely, yes. Whoa.
oops. Okay. Yes, we've had a
You're
little. We've had.
you're.
I moved.
Apparently you're going to get really, really crazy and really swear quite a bit
I'm
because
gonna
you
get
talk
very
over the
rowdy.
camera.
Uh, yes, I forgot that this chair. The it has. It's really one of those lounge chairs, and so you can kick out your feet. I forgot that, and I just leaned back and it did it. So sorry about that. Okay, I'm back. Anyway, well, we
Fastest
always said
recovery anyway, fastest recovery ever.
um, but yeah, but I do get rowdy when I talk about these things. But basically, we were said, it's women doing whatever the fuck we want. And I want to be clear, we were not exclusive of men. There were unbelievable male photographers that we worked with that totally got it, and they were excited to collaborate with men and women and really shed this idea that, the old ad agency model of which a bunch of men were deciding exactly what was going to happen and what we were going to sell and what products people want. And so there's no question, my business partner was a man. Men were a huge core part of this, but the ethos was women doing whatever the fuck they want. And I think that really appealed to this young group of 18 to 20-year-old, 22-year-old, college students, and they were out of their house for the first time. They were trying to figure out, what it was like and what it meant and where they wanted to go as women. And did they want to be career women, or did they want to, stay home, or, did they want to be a creative? And they kind of realized through their experiences and they could do whichever ones they wanted. It was up to them. It wasn't up to somebody else. And I think that's what spoke to people more than even the specific of what the creative was, or more than any single thing that I taught people. It was really just, oh, you can make your own path, and there are no rules. I choose and I set myself on that path, and I go 100 miles an hour. And if I decide one day that I want to do something else, that's okay. Then I'm going to, downshift for a minute, figure out what the new path is, and I'm going to charge ahead on that path. And, that's really what I hope arsenic is and was to people. And I have met and worked with some unbelievable women through it. And, and really all of them just wanted to make their own mark one way or the other. And arsenic became a really safe place to do that. And they knew they could experiment. And if it wasn't something that they liked, there was sort of no judgment, and they could try something else.
An interesting quote that you said, and if I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but I think it's accurate, and it really grabbed me, was a story you were talking about where you were saying how, you know, the metaphor that kind of that gets thrown around with the camera, which is the camera never lies. And you said that it was a partner you were working with, one of the photographers that you were working with, that said that's a complete falsehood because that's all the camera does is lie. But arsenic gave the outlet so that it wasn't at the same time.
You know, completely. I mean, one of the things that I think blew people away is that when Instagram happened, all of a sudden people started following all of these people, but you couldn't hear, you know, this is before people forget that Instagram used to only be still pictures. There was no Instagram stories. There was no video. And so people started really becoming entrenched with these Instagram influencers. They never knew what they sounded like. And then all of a sudden, all of these influencers that people followed were on the arsenic Snapchat, and they were talking. And they thought people were from Australia, that they never knew had accents. I mean, like crazy things like that. And these women, you know, for whatever reason, and I think because it wasn't a still picture, they weren't as self-conscious about, you know, it's got to be the, you know, finding the perfect picture and the perfect angle. And all of a sudden they were just real. And people saw the behind the scenes of these people that they followed and looked up to, men and women. And all of a sudden they realized, wait a second, they don't get out of bed looking like that. And they, you know, they pick up after their dog when they take them for a walk. And, you know, they wake up with a zit. And, you know, and it suddenly felt really real. And I think people responded to that because it finally, you had always heard about how, you know, any magazine ad that you see has been touched up, but until you actually experience and watch somebody show up on a set, go to hair and makeup, and then shoot, and all the things that go into making somebody look like that, it's hard to understand. And we kind of took away all those layers and just said, this is real. And the interesting thing is it didn't take anything away from the women and their talent or beauty, or the photographer and his incredible skill or her incredible skill. It just added to it to really get a chance to understand that they're real people too. And they could have been the person you went to high school with, or your best friend, or somebody you run into at a restaurant. And it really changed the game, I think, in a lot of ways. And people really, really responded to that. And, you know, the project you're specifically speaking to was Scott Nathan, who's actually a cigar smoker, and he's a Micallef ambassador. And he was an incredibly successful commercial photographer. Mm-hmm. But, you know, after 15 years of shooting some of the biggest makeup campaigns, you know, for companies you can imagine, went, all I do all day is create perfect images that have nothing to do with reality. And it's great and it's fun, but, you know, I want to show people like people. And he put a whole, you know, he did this project called Confessional that was really just about people with no makeup on, you know, not necessarily literally naked, but naked in the sense of bearing their soul to the camera, and just would let it run for 20 minutes or longer, just to see how people would slowly start to shed this persona that people put on when the camera first gets turned on, and forget it's on and just become real. Mm-hmm. And it's a fascinating project because he worked with huge stars and upcoming models and, you know, people from different walks of life and artists. And it's really interesting to watch the evolution of people kind of relaxing in front of the camera. You don't see it very much.
So, and you were very quick a moment ago to define that this very much is a you know, women-centric project, that it's not solely for women. It's very inclusive to men. It's also multi-generational too. You know, your partner Billy Hawkins, and you I remember you recanting in an interview talking about your first realization of generational gap. We were talking about Danger Zone at the top of the show, and I remember a story of my brother and I talking. My brother my brother worked his way through school, and he graduated much longer after I did, but he did it all on his own. I mean, I couldn't be prouder of him and the hard work that he did. And he was telling me a story. This is several years after I graduated. So the kids, and that's what they were several years his junior in class, and they were talking about Tom Cruise, and they're talking about some of like, oh, what's your favorite Tom Cruise film? That very,
Right.
vanilla conversation. And they were dropping names of films, and he's just like, he kind of just inserts in the middle. He's like, Top Gun. And these kids had absolutely no idea about the film. And that just blows my mind.
Well, so on the last Friday before Christmas this year, we had a little viewing party at Micallef Cigars because Sam, who's the marketing manager and I work very closely with, had never seen Top Gun. And I was just like, this is a crime and we must fix this.
Yes.
And so we had a little viewing party because I was just like, how have you not seen, it's a foundational movie. But there's a generation of people that haven't seen it. I mean, everything at Arsenic was that way. It was hysterical. I didn't realize I was so old until I started hanging out with a bunch of 19-year-olds. And there's TV shows that they don't know or they think are vintage, and I'm like, what are you talking about? I do remember when I moved back to Texas from LA, I was listening to the radio, and there's some great radio stations here, except for the fact that all of the music from when I was in high school is now considered it's the retro station. And I was like, what are you, and it blows my mind that like I'm old enough for that to be true, but I guess it's true.
Just don't think of it as retro. No, Sam was an incredible guest of mine on this show with when we did a celebration of the 20th anniversary of Gladiator, which of course he was like 3 when it came out, right? So
right.
So his perspective on Gladiator was much different than me and my other his other fellow guest with Justin Andrews, who's more contemporary of my age. So we were about the same age when it came out. So we, and but Sam's perspective on it was really was actually really refreshing, that there are things that stand the time, and then there's things why an inexplainable wrong, which you righted, thank you, by allowing him to watch Top Gun. So that's wonderful. But specifically to women empowerment, because I mean at its core, I don't think that's mislabeling what Arsenic really is. Maybe it's
not at all
creative empowerment, but was this something that again that you kind of stumbled in along the way, or because of obviously you're being a woman in Hollywood, which is still to this day still very male dominated? Was it an issue that you kind of grabbed a hold of early on in your career, or did you kind of just stumble into it with this project?
So it was interesting. I grew up, and I mentioned this on Do It With the Ambassadors on a Friday Live, that I grew up, Al, my dad, has always had women in leadership roles in his companies. And what you grow up with. So I grew up and I would go to my dad's office and there would be many women and they were vice presidents and directors, and he was a huge champion of women. And the only thing he ever said to me is, Amanda, you can do anything you set your mind to. And my mother, who was much quieter than my dad, but like steel, as strong as they come. And so I had these 2 examples of people who really, really believed that women, were capable of doing anything. And so I had no idea that there was another world that existed until I got out of the house. And then, the film business is interesting in that there are not as many women that rise up to the higher levels, but it's not an anti-woman world. It is a very intense, place, and hours are long. And if you want to pursue actually begin production and shooting movies, you end up on location for a long length of time. So a lot of women don't end up going that route. They end up doing more TV and things because the hours and the life's a little more predictable. And if you want to raise a family and have kids, it's hard to be able to just pick up and leave for 9 months at a time. Mm-hmm. So, but I never got the vibe that like I couldn't, pursue whatever level I wanted as a woman.
Yeah.
So it never really sunk in for me until I had reached the level of producing movies, and I would be on conference calls, getting, talking to, you know, maybe the company that bought our film. And so here we are talking about releasing the movie and all these things. And I was the only woman on the phone. And every time somebody would go to tell a joke, or, they would swear, they would stop and say, "Oh, sorry." And they would apologize to me because I was, a girl. And it would drive me crazy because, I know they were trying to be gentlemen, and they thought they were doing what was right. But in a sense, they were also calling me out, as being less than, or less prepared than, or more delicate than they were. And that was the first moment that I realized that, wait a second, because I'm a girl, I can't find that joke funny, or because I'm a woman, I'm going to be offended by your language. And, I was a tomboy. I played army with my brother and rode horses. Like, I was pretty rough and tumble. And I was kind of blown away by this idea that, like, my ears are so delicate, I can't hear you swear. I mean, and Dan will tell you if he's listening, I have a way worse mouth than anybody else in the office. But, that's when I started to realize that, oh, people do see me as different just because I'm a woman. And it wasn't like it didn't become my fight yet, but it just started to sort of resonate with me that I don't come to the table with the same footing as a man, that people are conscious of the fact that I'm on this call in a way they would be different, or in this meeting that is different than the way they would be if they were just men. And, I think that resonated. I didn't truly know what to do about it other than just, keep doing what I was doing, until I got on set on that first photo shoot and really saw the models being treated like hangers. And no one was rude to them, but there was this idea they should have no voice. And, part of the story that I left out is on the second photo shoot, I thought I had found a photographer who did happen to be male. And he was supposed to be completely down to collaborate with this model's vision. And we got about 20 minutes into the photo shoot, after hair and makeup and everything, and it was very clear that he wasn't collaborative. And I asked him to leave. And I was just like, screw it, we'll shoot it ourselves. But you don't get what we're doing. And, and that's probably the moment where it really became a fight for me. And not a fight against men, but just a fight for women to have the same voice and the same opportunity as men do. And there are a lot of men that are so on board with this. And, Arsenic would not be what Arsenic was. And any of the things that I've done since would not have gotten there without men and women. But there are some people that are still not necessarily ready or used to this sort of idea that, we all come to the table equal and we're going to all make decisions together. And I just kind of made a conscious decision that, I want to work with the people that believe that. And anybody else, God bless, but not for me.
Real quick sidebar on arsenic. Is there to have to do with does arsenic have anything to do with the old noir film Arsenic and Old Lace? Or
it doesn't. So
love that movie, by the way. Just
it's a fantastic movie. But when I was trying to think of a name, I was far enough along that I kind of knew that I wanted to invert this paradigm that had traditionally been about, there were people with the power and there was people without. And I really thought, I wanted to flatten the playing field. And I knew that I wanted to create in a way that everybody had an equal voice. And so that idea was in my head, and then I was trying to think of a name of something, and I kind of knew that all the good names would be taken. And what I meant by good names is all the things that would have previously had a positive connotation, I would never have the ability to own. I couldn't get a social media or a URL or whatever. And it just popped in so the idea was, let's take a negative and turn it into a positive. And then Arsenic just popped in my head, and it started out as a placeholder and then kind of became the name. I just couldn't find anything that I liked better. And so the mission when we started was, we're going to take this previous negative thing and turn it into a positive. And my goal was to make it a verb. I wanted to get to a point where people would start to say, that's so arsenic. And what they would mean is, that's so edgy and cool and provocative and forward thinking.
Nice. So you spend a decade plus, working at your dream, producing some films, building this incredible brand with Arsenic, and then you join up with Micallef Cigars. You kind of come home, so to speak, a little bit with it. Um, and
Yes.
so the question I know is the answer. You know, we talked about women empowerment, and you're wanting to empower the people that, not even necessarily women empowerment, but the idea of empowering the people that didn't have the power. And let's get something out right now, that there are incredible women in this industry of cigars, legends, icons. I had the opportunity to speak to one of
Yes.
them on Tuesday, Cynthia
Yes.
Fuente. Unbelievable,
Yes. I
unbelievable.
mean, she's a, she's, I mean, she's everything, right? And um, she is an icon. That's the best way to say it. And there's so many women like that in the business. I had no idea how many women were in decision-making roles in the cigar business, but I also had no idea how many women were involved in everything from growing tobacco to aging, rolling. I mean, you name it. And I made the mistake that I think a lot of people make of just sort of assuming that it was kind of a boys' club,
Mhm.
and it's really not.
Right.
Um, and and I think it's a fascinating space because I do think that it's kind of one of the last things that are left that people still kind of think about as a more male-centric thing. And I am not looking to take cigars away from men. I think it's awesome that men get together with their friends and smoke. And I think it's important that people have places to go and decompress and have conversations. I just want to open up the idea of that to women as well. Um, and I think cigars are particularly interesting because, you know, women, we have these things that are, my friends and I talk about armor, and we think of armor as, or the high heels that we might put on, or the makeup, or the clothes, or women who maybe dye their hair pink. It's all armor to us to some degree. We're all suiting up to go out into the world to kick ass. And I have noticed since I started, smoking, that a cigar, for lack of I mean, I enjoy smoking a cigar, but it's also this phenomenal prop that if you have a cigar in your hand, it's a little like having a sword in your hand. Like, you can't be meek. There's a power to it, and to really enjoying a cigar and taking the time for yourself to sit down for an hour or more and enjoy a cigar. And women don't. We tend to be doing 900 things at once, and we multitask, and we're dropping the kids off, we're doing this, and you can't do that if you're smoking a cigar. You have to choose you. And I think there's a lot of strength in that. And I think that it is an incredible piece of a woman's armor. And I just don't know that enough women have realized that yet. And so I think a big part of what I'm hoping that we can do starting this conversation is open more women up to the idea that if they want to enjoy this thing, how much fun it can be, and the sense of strength they can get from being part of this community.
Absolutely. And speaking of Cynthia Fuente, it was actually her brother Carlito who, this was in the 90s. He was on a panel. He told this story in the interview that I had with him on Tuesday about, I mean, think about this. I mean, this is, 20 plus years ago, and how relevant it is to the conversation today, which is, the manufacturers that were on this panel were asked, what are you doing for women? And manufacturer A talked about how they were working on this flavored line, and manufacturer B talked about how they're working on these thinner, smaller cigars, and manufacturer C something along the same line. And Carlito tells the story. He told the story. I mean, there's no way I can recant it with the vigor that he exclamated at, but he was basically like, I make cigars for people. And
Yeah.
and that's kind of what led you into this, and we'll get to some other projects that
Yeah.
you have done, but you've written a 60-page journal about answering that very question, why cigars? And because it's not a man thing, it's not a woman thing, it's a person thing. So talk about why you wanted to put on paper, why did you wanted to pen your experience down? Why was that important to you, specifically?
So, we've talked a lot about what I've previously done. And clearly I've been incredibly fortunate. I work with a lot of women, and a lot of women that are very, very, empowerment based and forward thinking, and a lot of women that have really, made a decision that they're going to take control of the choices they have, and and live their life. And many of them have made tough choices in the sense that they've they're living their life out loud. They're living their life on social media, and sometimes they've been doing it in a fairly provocative way. And a lot of interest and likes, and you can grow a big following, but they catch a lot of crap and a lot of flack and deal with a lot of bullshit too. So I was surprised when I started having conversations with them about cigars, because it was this idea that wasn't for them. And I started thinking about it a lot, and I got a lot of the same questions about, well, how do you smoke, and what do you do, and do you smell like smoke all the time? And if I'm being completely real, and I may as well be, because in the journal I very clearly state, when I came back to work with our family businesses, I was super excited, and I knew them all pretty well, except for the cigar business. And the cigar business was something my dad had started a few years earlier. And I got to be real, I didn't understand it. I didn't understand it as a business. I didn't really get it. I didn't know what his interest was. I understood that why he would like to go to a lounge and smoke with some people from a community standpoint. But I'm like, why did you pick this? You started this business. He's 73 years old. Like, this is probably the last business he's ever going to start in his life. It's also the only business he ever put his name on. So clearly there was something about it that resonated with him. And so I'm like, why is this the legacy that you want to put the Micallef name on, and that you want to be your last business? And so I was like, and I smoked a few cigars. I was like, I don't even get these. But when it clicked, and I started to enjoy smoking, and then when I started to really peel back the layers and understand the strength that also comes from this community, and understand the women that have been part of this community, and understand the generations deep of these families that have dedicated their life to hand rolling cigars, and what they've given up, and the hardships, so that they've undertaken to bring these cigars to people. I became very, very passionate about telling that story. And then as I became passionate, I really wanted to share it with my friends and with people I respected, and many of them are women. And there was this real barrier, because they felt like I did. They didn't get it. And so, I really kind of started thinking about, how do I help explain it to people? And the only way I knew to do it was to kind of, and I'm not somebody who ever wants to tell my story or be in front of the camera or reveal anything, but only way I knew to do it was kind of to be really naked and real, and just be like, look, 18 months ago, I had never smoked a cigar, and these are all the questions I had. And it is intimidating, and it is scary, but it's worth pushing through all that fear, because on the other side are some of the best friends you're ever going to have, is a community that you can't even imagine. And at its core, you're supporting a group of people who've given their life and their children's lives and their parents and their grandparents to creating these incredible handmade products. And there are not that many things in the world left that are truly handmade in the sense that cigars are. At some point, machines come into almost everything, but not cigars. And it just became, kind of very important to me. And I do think as women continue to rise, and we're in such an interesting time. I mean, more women are getting college degrees than men. More women are starting to control wealth than men. There's all these things that this generation is sort of changing and pivoting, or at least becoming truly equal to. And cigars are kind of that last thing. And it's like, hey, if you want this, you should enjoy it and go for it. And the women that I've introduced cigars to are, you can just see, they just light up once they kind of start to embrace it and understand all the different facets of it. And so, yes, cigars are awesome, and they taste great, and it's fun, and we should, all pay homage to these incredible families that make these cigars. But I also think that for women, it's really, really important, because it's finally saying, I deserve the same thing that men do. And I should sit down with my girlfriends or my boyfriend or my husband or whoever and take an hour for myself and
or
light
just
a cigar
themselves.
and enjoy it. And I've earned that. Absolutely. And And I think that I think that more and more women, and we've seen it without like whiskey. Women really drive whiskey today, and 15 years ago that wouldn't have been the case. But we've seen more and more women embrace this idea that like I've arrived, and I don't mean them personally, but as women, we really finally are on an equal footing in this world, and cigars kind of represent that in a lot of ways.
I mean, I couldn't agree more, because I've spent many conversations, many interviews, many times repeating the same statement: cigars are the great equalizer. So
Yes.
why wouldn't they? We talk about the grease monkey who's the best friends with the brain surgeon, or
Yep.
the academic who discusses everything from philosophy to sports, with a janitor, and it's the great equalizer. Well, why wouldn't it be the great equalizer across the sex barrier too?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's the thing that is so incredible, that you do, once you're in the lounge and you're sitting down and you're smoking, no one cares anymore what you do, where you came from. It just becomes about a great conversation and about getting to know a person. And so, I think bringing men and women together in that space is only going to be positive.
I couldn't agree more, and it kind of pivots to this part of the conversation, which is we fast forwarded to this journal that you penned, but I want to take it back a second from a year ago, when you and Dan and Al and the entire leadership team at Micallef decide to pivot, what I've kind of coined as the COVID pivot. What are we going to do now? And you guys become lo and behold, your wheelhouse, a content creator.
Yes. So it was an interesting moment, right? And we've been incredibly fortunate because people like yourself have really given, Micallef and the leadership team at Micallef a lot of credit for making that decision. The truth is, I don't know if we deserve the credit so much because, in some ways we had no choice. We woke up one day and lounges were closed. We had a sales team that we wanted and had, thank goodness, the privilege and the ability to keep paying through all of this. So what were we going to do with them? And at the same time, we knew all these people who smoke cigars were going to be stuck at home. And so creating content for them was a very natural, obvious idea. And it was also, for me, a really comfortable space to go into. I was way more comfortable thinking about creating content at that point. I was 5 months into Micallef Cigars than I was talking about cigars. I mean, I knew content. I'd spent 20 years doing it. To me, the real props go, the real commendation goes to Andy and Sam and the sales team, who hadn't spent 20 years creating content, and they quickly became fantastic content creators. I mean, they were producers, they were talent, and they did it seamlessly. And so, all I did was, with Dan, we gave him the channel and some guideposts, but the sales team rose to the occasion in ways far beyond what I could have imagined. And the audience, the ambassadors, they embraced it. And we went from having a really great ambassador group to really having this prolific two-way conversation that you kind of always dream of with a community. I mean, the point of having a community is not so I can broadcast to them, it's that so that we can all talk to each other. And all of a sudden, everyone was home with time on their hands, and we were having a conversation every single day with our consumers.
Multiple times a day.
It was yes. And so, while I certainly, if I could go back in time and erase COVID from the world, I would. So I don't want to say it was a good thing, but that became a positive outcome of a very unfortunate thing for us. We are so much closer to our ambassadors today than we were, and we would have gotten there, but we got there in 5 months instead of 5 years.
Right.
And being able to do that was really awesome. And again, to the credit of Andy and his team, their willingness to go, okay, I don't really know, but we'll figure this out, was awesome. I mean, they could have said, I don't do this. I'm a sales guy. I don't make content, but they didn't. They really, really embraced it. And I can't believe the talent we have for on camera talent that I never knew we had, but they've done an awesome job. It's been fun. And we had a great time with it.
Well, the greatest wild card you guys had in your pocket was Brandon Luna, who actually, I mean, he did podcasting before podcasting was a thing.
Yep. And I mean, he's brilliant, right?
Yeah.
And they, and they all got their own personalities, and they were willing to kind of show them and put them out there. And it was great. And then the ambassadors' willingness to jump on and to join us either via comment or on screen and all sorts of things. Nobody, who knew Zoom a year ago? And now we all know how to use Zoom. But it didn't happen overnight, and people were kind of just willing to go, okay, I'll try this.
No, it really was fantastic. And the bar was very quickly and very early on, the bar was set incredibly high. I was a guest on off the record very early.
Yes.
I had the privilege of that. And Dan and Andy invited me on, and I hope that as Dan's watching tonight that he I hope to the standard he set, I hope I meet the bar, because I mean him and Andy were more prepared for an interview than than many media people are. And I've watched countless hours of interviews of my colleagues interviewing people, and I've of course conducted 160 of these, so or 159 and a half at this point. And I was thoroughly impressed with not just the production and not just the consideration, but the quality, the attention to detail, and just the overall professionalism that you all bring to the table in this thing that really, again, isn't your foray, for all intents and purposes. It was just fantastic.
Well, thank you. It's not, but it is. I mean, again, we were very fortunate in that, the president of the company, I mean, Dan, his instincts and his leadership skills and even his awareness of media is really outstanding. And Dan brings a level of professionalism to anything he does. I mean, he very much operates from this. If you're going to do it, we're going to excel at it, or we're not going to do it. And he's a realist. He knows we can't do everything, but what we're going to do, we're going to do very well. And content is a space that I'm, comfortable in. We were fortunate, Sam, Micallef Cigars is the first job Sam had out of college. And the incredible thing about working with young people is they're digital natives. I mean, they grew up with Facebook. So though he hadn't done a lot of content creation, he had an ability to pivot and to turn into that space very easily. And then, like I said, Andy and the sales teams were just very willing to say, all right, let's just figure this out. And they really did. So, I mean, it was a team effort, but had anybody been resistant, I think we would be telling a very different story today. We were very, very lucky that everyone was down to just roll up their sleeves and figure it out.
And figure out, you certainly did. Like I said, it wasn't just the content specifically, but like every day I would look down at my phone and I would see an alert be like, Andy Effie's now live on Facebook. Dan is now live on Facebook. And it was just this, at a given point, I could join a conversation with friends, essentially is what it is. The community that you built.
That was the goal, was to fill a void, that people were going to find themselves a little bit out of sorts. I mean, when your adult life, have you found, how many people who got up and suited up and, went to work every day, been in a situation where all of a sudden, in the blink of an eye, you're working from home, or maybe you have no job at all. And it's scary, and we don't know what's going to happen. And the news is telling us the world is going to come to an end and we're all going to get this terrible, terrible disease. And so, I think, we made a lot. I mean, Sam will know the number, I don't remember, but the number of hours of content we made those first 60 days is absurd. But it was really that, good or bad, we wanted to be meatloaf for people. We wanted to provide that comfort food, and it's the safe place to go.
Yeah, I just couldn't agree more. I've said this, I've stated this position on it a number of times. And I was pleased. I was pleased last year when Dan was a part of a panel that I put together on this show with a couple of other brand owners that talked about the efforts of what, at the time. The time we didn't know where it was, but it ended up being the very beginning of what became the year of COVID. Um, and I'm pleased that him and those gentlemen have agreed to come back. It's kind of like a retrospective on it, which will be a fantastic show that will be coming up.
That'll be a great show.
But like, again, not just the content that you guys put out. You guys were constantly in with these initiatives and initiations of different projects. From being able to provide services to your consumers by basically, drop shipping to consumers, but still through the retailer. Unbelievable. And then the passport program was probably one of my favorite, because it engaged unwillingly. No, not unwillingly. Unknowingly is probably the best way. It engaged unknowingly every single facet of the Micallef operation, from the manufacturing of the product to the retailer who's now supplying the goods, to the consumer who's now enjoying just an activity, again, with the community that they're now a part of. What was the impetus of, I mean, was it something that was it something y'all were working on pre-COVID, and then it just like, oh, this is the perfect opportunity to launch such a program, or was it an after effect?
So Dan probably remembers the timeline better. I'm terrible at times, so I don't actually remember exactly whether we thought about it pre-COVID or post-COVID. The idea was really about, how do we create a desire for people to try the entire portfolio and educate people. So in many ways, Micallef almost grew too fast, in the sense that, we partnered with Gomez Sanchez family, and we're so incredible. They're so talented, and they had a portfolio of incredible blends that they just had never been able to really bring to market. And then, we began launching those, and then from feedback from consumers, there was also this desire for some, stronger flavors and things. And so we end up launching the Bold, and all of a sudden we're this like 3-year-old company with like 42 Vitolas or something. I mean, it was big. And, and a lot of people had
Impressive.
no idea that we had all of these blends. And I think it actually came in the middle of COVID, because that was happening in the background. And we were having this conversation about how do we really, bring people into all of the blends so they can discover not just a single Micallef, but several Micallefs. And then we also were aware that, stores were selling through inventory. They were in some cases having a hard time refilling stock. People were not always being able to get, depending on how much stock different manufacturers had in the country, they weren't always able to get things in from other countries because of everything was going on. And we also recognized that, as things started to open up this summer, that a lot of our retail partners wouldn't necessarily have big fat checkbooks. And so we knew that we wanted to be able to, and we had the other thing, I guess, that was also working in the background is Al is a crazy supply chain person. And so we keep an enormous amount of inventory in the United States, whereas a lot of manufacturers keep a lot of inventory in the country that they roll in, and they bring it in kind of as needed. And so when countries started shutting down and shipping got hard, we had a broad amount of inventory here as opposed to sitting rolled somewhere else. And so we knew that we could fill gaps for people who were looking for different cigars. We knew that we could provide for our retail partners either through this, the program that would drop ship, or, also by creating, a program that allowed them to go broader than they normally would. And so the thought was, how do we create something that worked for the consumers and worked for the retail partners? And kind of, we were able to access the fact that we had this sort of broad inventory in the United States. And we came up with a program for our retailers that really allowed them to buy deep, but not have the pressure that people typically have in like a normal trade show promotion, where it's like, you got to buy now, you have to spend a lot to get the biggest discount. And so we created a program for our retailers that really was focused on sort of carrying more of the Micallef portfolio, and providing them a way to purchase at really, favorable pricing, but also to continue to purchase for the rest of the year, so that they wouldn't have to make a big single purchase, but they could make, more purchases at a discount throughout the year that would allow them to bring different things to their consumers, but without feeling, the stress on their checkbook in a really challenging, tough year. And then, of course, we wanted to also make sure that our consumers were interested in smoking these things that we were asking our retail partners to bring into their stores. And so then we also, and that's where the passport played into it too. It's like, okay, well, if we're going to ask our retailers to look at, broader, but not necessarily as deep, how do we make sure that we're supporting them? And the passport was also that piece of it. So that, we wanted to make sure that we provided our consumers with some education and some knowledge around the other Micallef blends that they maybe haven't tried. And so we released the two pieces together last summer, and they really were meant to work in concert with each other. And it's helped. I mean, I can't tell you, one of my favorite things about the passport is you can complete a passport and be entered in the drawings if you just put the ring in, the cigar ring for the blends. You don't have to fill out the tasting notes, but a lot of people do. And then when you submit your passport, there's a note section that you don't have to fill in, but you can add your comments. And one of the most rewarding things has been how many people will write in and say, I discovered this blend that I never would have tried, or I didn't even know you had this sort of cigar, and now I do. That it really opened people's eyes to the broad flavors and blends that we do have. And I think I hope that through it, it's also provided some pull through for the retailers. In the cigar world, they have to buy the inventory and put it on their shelves. So your retail partners have to take two bets on you. They have to give you space, and if they're giving it to you, that means somebody else isn't getting it. And they buy the product, for the most part, they buy the product and have to hope that they sell it. And in a lot of, when I sold DVDs and released a movie, if DVD didn't sell, they could send it back. That's not Cigars doesn't work that way. So you're really asking these retail partners to bet on you. They have skin in the game right there with you. Yeah. And so, we really wanted to make sure that we provided them with an ability to pull that inventory through to sell it, to make sure that it wasn't sitting stale on their shelves. And I think the passport has really done that.
It really is a fabulous program, and it's something that one of the things that I absolutely, and I've said it several times now in our conversation, but one of the things that I love so much about is this: it can be boiled down to one thing, which is engagement. We talked about empowering women a few minutes ago, and then it turned into empowering the people without power, and but this is actually empowering the people that do have the most power, but maybe don't feel like it, which is the consumer. Yeah. Because the consumer it drives the business. And
without doubt, at the end of the day, it does not matter what we want. It matters what the consumer wants.
100%. And I think, for a long time now, I've been pleased to have been part of a couple of retail operations that didn't operate this way. But I do know of retailers that for a long time, and probably still do to some extent, do operate in this fashion, that they determine what the stock is, and it has nothing, in a lot of cases, unfortunately, has nothing to do with business acumen, and has everything to do with personal taste and everything. Mm-hmm. But what you did by empowering the consumers was drive the retailer to change their entire the entire way of doing business they have done for decades in some cases, which was, not to be too over the top here, but it's quite revolutionary.
Maybe, that's very kind of you to say. if it's revolutionary, it's revolutionary. We didn't rewrite the playbook. Admittedly, there are some cigar retailers that maybe have been doing things the same way for a very long time, and so maybe we shook things up a little in that way. But really, at the end of the day, all we did was sort of like, the golden rule of any consumer-facing business. We listen to the consumers, and we really recognize that we exist in service of them. And we exist in service of our retail partners because, Micallef is not and has no intention of becoming a direct-to-consumer business. And so our retail partners are truly our partners. And so anything we do has to work for them as well as for us, or one party or the other doesn't exist. And that business model is not tenable for us. And so, we didn't reinvent the wheel. We just became laser focused on how do we make sure that our retail partners have a healthy business, and then how do we make sure that we're delivering something to the consumers that the consumers want.
No, absolutely. And like I said, you guys just did an incredible job. And it's something that
That's very kind.
I was just, I think, as I was witnessing as it was happening, it just became this kind of this force that was immediately recognizable. And it was just something that I was just, I'm still just very impressed with. It's a minor understatement, but it's just very impressive with what you guys have been able to accomplish and everything. So, this is kind of going into the fun, what I call the fun part of the show and everything, with a couple of features and everything. But in your mind, in retrospect, of the past 12 months of COVID and the way that you guys were able to pivot, this seems like such a silly question, but what were you most proud to be part of?
Truthfully, I think the thing that I'm most proud of is that on day one, Al and Dan decided we were going to keep our sales team and our factory employed, no matter what. And that decision was awesome, but it was also to go in knowing that everybody had a job, everybody's family was going to get fed, no one was going to have to stay awake at night wondering if they had the basics covered, was incredibly powerful, because it allowed us to then make all the other decisions without having to worry about that piece in the background. And so I'm truly incredibly proud to work for two leaders that quickly made that decision, and made that decision no matter what was coming in the future, that at the minimum, they wanted to make sure that the people that worked for them were taken care of. And, it's an incredible foundation to start with. And then, the thing that I'm sort of, the next thing is that, and then the way that we were able to really get to know and spend time with our ambassadors and grow the ambassador community and really become a family has been incredibly humbling. We have ambassadors who will send other ambassadors cigars because they can't, get that cigar locally, or show up if somebody has a flat tire and change a tire. These are not just consumers who like the same brand. They take care of each other. And that's an awesome thing. And I mean awesome in the sense of what awesome really means. To know that we're a small part of putting together a community that has each other's back, even in a year like this, it really, really makes all the noise go away. And it's very easy to sort of focus on the signal and know, there's a great foundation. There are leaders that will make sure that we take care of our consumers and our retail partners and the people that work at the company. And everything else we do from there just becomes gravy.
I wanted to pass this compliment off to you from one of my most loyal listeners, Jay Davis, great retailer here in the DFW area. He said, what amazes him the most is that you and Dan, who have, very little experience in the cigar business per se, operate your business like companies that have been selling cigars for decades, and it's truly impressive. So I wanted to pass that.
Thank you, Jay. Anytime, it's always like to compliments, but whenever, our retail partners share them, it means a lot. So thank you.
Yeah, Jay's certainly one of the best. So, Amanda, that really kind of takes us into what I call like the fun part of the show. It's two of my favorite segments back to back, and so we're gonna have fun with you a little bit right now, which is this is our one must go segment, which has become incredibly popular. And it's as always, it's brought to you by United Cigars, featuring La Giana Havana and distributors of Jose Dominguez, Bandolero, Garofalo, and the highly acclaimed Atabey and Byron lines. So smoke once a day and start living united. Now, Amanda, we kind of went back to your journey in the very beginnings and how, specifically arsenic kind of came to be, and you became this, you really grasped the concept of social media very quickly. And then as we just kind of illustrated and with Micallef Cigars, you reined that in again, and it became very much a part of y'all's identity for the past 12 months. And I remember an interview that you gave, and again, I might be paraphrasing here, so if I'm mischaracterizing you, please correct me. But you said that social media will solve the fake news problem. It will shape the world for the better eventually. And that's a pretty bold statement considering, how unfortunately toxic social media can be at times. But before I asked you the one must go, am I mischaracterizing your assessment of what social media will do for our society?
You're not at all, and I'm not deaf to the fact that there is a toxic nature. And I have seen firsthand the comments that people will make to people. There's this, somehow behind a social media account, people will say things to people they would never say in person. And so it's not lost on me. But what social media does do is it brings people closer together, and it's impossible to ignore genocide that's happening on the other side of the world, or children starving 10,000 miles away when it's coming to you in your feed on your phone. And that's why I believe ultimately, big picture, long term, social media will shed a light onto things and put them in front of people in a way that we no longer can pretend that things that are happening outside of our small world are okay. And so I really do believe that, big picture, 20 years from now, 10 years from now, major things will change because people will demand change, and they will demand it because they saw it in their social media feed.
I think that's a very great assessment, and I agree with you, and I certainly hope that you're right, because I'm reminded of, I don't know if you're familiar with the film Hotel Rwanda, Don Cheadle.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and there's a very very poignant part in that film where he talks about, he's like, hey, you have to understand that this is what's going on in Rwanda is, you all you see of it, if you're inside your little bubble in America, you're over orange juice and a bagel, you're watching the morning news report and you're seeing what the terrible genocide that's happening in Rwanda, and you're like, oh, that's terrible, what an awful thing, and you go about the rest of your day, and it doesn't affect you. And it's a pretty bold realization that, yeah, when things are kind of out of sight, even with television, even though it's in your face, it really doesn't. But social media has that personal that personal grab you by the collar a little bit. So I think that I think that assessment's pretty spot on, and I think it definitely can have the positive influence that you're talking about. So so with that, Amanda, your thoughts on social media, since you hold it in such high regard, big picture, as you stated. I wanted to ask you, this is, like I said, this is meant to be fun. Which social media forum has to go? So I'm going to give you three, and one has to go. You think it's going to be the least influential? Bing, we're going to think big picture here, right?
Okay.
The least influential is going to have the least impact, so one's got to go. So here we go. Instagram, which is basically the foundation for arsenic, okay? And for a lot of companies too. Twitter, which is kind of really kind of had a rebirth in recent years. It kind of went downhill for a while, and it's kind of come back in terms of news aspect of it. And something you yourself have been a part of, was part of the revolution of it when it first started, and you kind of took it over. Snapchat. So Snapchat, Twitter, and Instagram, one's got to go in terms of the framework of the way it's going to shape our tomorrow. Which one's going?
Twitter.
Okay. How so?
It's the most, I think it's the most divisive. I think it's the most cliquish. And I think that if you only stay in your own camp, your eyes can't be opened. And there's no great discovery on Twitter. And so it's very hard to break outside of what you already know and think. Whereas Snapchat and Instagram, which certainly have their faults, but they do a better job of introducing you to other content, which can broaden your horizons and your ideas.
Interesting. Okay. I do feel that, like, I spend more, in terms of forums, I spend very little time on Snapchat. So why do you think Snapchat still has a place in the future? Your thoughts. I'm just curious.
It's hard to say. I hope that Snapchat is able to continue to differentiate itself enough from Instagram that it has a place. For a long time, they had a path that was very unique. Instagram has added a lot of those tools, and so there's a lot of redundancy, but they're starting to really differentiate themselves and become a media platform for short form content. And really, they've created, better than Instagram, an ability to get content from other professional channels on their platform. And so I think if they continue to go down that path and have sort of that semi-pro kind of content available and keep serving that up, I think that it could become a very powerful thing. They also have, they're the most innovative of the three companies. Unfortunately, they keep getting ripped off, but their development team keeps coming up with new ideas. And so, I think they have the best hope of being able to create the thing that none of us have even thought about yet. Because they've done it multiple times where they've brought tools and brought things into the hands, of a user on their phone that no one had ever imagined before. And for that reason, I believe that there is another life for Snapchat. They will buckle down and they'll figure out something that nobody has thought of before, and they're going to change again how we consume content on our phone.
While I don't participate in Snapchat, I actually have to agree with you on that aspect, that they really are, again, not to pull this word back from the previous part of the interview, but they really are revolutionary in a lot of cases, where they've, the whole concept of the story, which is kind of really taken social media by storm. Even Twitter has stories now. They're so late to the game on it, though, that it's just kind of it's just an unfortunate byproduct. It just sits there. Well, my Instagram feed and my new Facebook feed, there's stories galore from everybody, from people I follow, from my friends, etc. With like Twitter, there's like 2 people that have an active story, and I follow probably the same number of people, give or take.
I mean, many of the tools that you use today that you think of as being Instagram or Facebook tools, truly the R&D and the development happen at Snapchat. They've done a terrible job of creating a moat and keeping those things, owned by themselves. But the innovation that comes out of that company, it's revolutionary. It continues to change the game, and I don't think we've seen the last of them.
No, I completely agree. I'm interested because this is kind of your area of expertise. I'm interested to hear you, because Orlando just brought this up. He's like, who owns Instagram, right? Well, it's Facebook, of course. And that's why I specifically didn't put Facebook in this list, because I think Facebook actually has, in a lot of ways, and a lot of it has to do with Instagram. It's really kind of it really shapes it unknowingly. It shapes our daily lives in a lot of ways. Even people who don't have Facebook accounts necessarily, or aren't very active on Facebook, use Facebook as a tool for a number of things.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's
I
partially
mean,
why I
they
used it.
wield, it's a little, there's a scary aspect to it. I mean, Facebook and Instagram are so prolific in our lives. Even if you don't think you're active on Facebook, oftentimes you're logging into things with Facebook and all, that they have an enormous amount of power to a point of it being kind of frightening in many ways. But, I don't think they're going anywhere. I also think that there is a saturation and people are starting to hit uh, a point in which they're a little bit tired of a single company having so much. And a lot of influencers, because of various ways that Facebook and Instagram choose to, control content and the distribution of content, have kind of hit a wall. There will be a major uprising of a platform that does not exist in the next 5 years. I don't know who will ultimately create it and grab hold, but influencers are hungry for an alternative. And where the content creator goes, so will the audience. And so I don't mean to say Instagram and Facebook aren't going anywhere. Neither is Snapchat. But in X number of years, there will be a new player that people will also be actively using. And I don't believe I don't think they exist yet. I couldn't guess who they are because I don't think anyone's figured it out. It's somebody who's building away in Silicon Valley right now, and none of us know who they are. But somebody will be what Facebook was to MySpace, and take them down a notch for sure.
Wow. Okay. I'm eager to see that prediction come true. I think
It'll be
that'll be
interesting.
interesting. Yeah, interesting to say the least. That's awesome. Well, Amanda, thank you for participating in our One Must Go.
For sure.
As always, it's brought to you by United Cigars, featuring La Giana Havana, distributors of Jose Dominguez, Bandolera, Garofalo, and the highly acclaimed Atabey and Byron lines. So smoke one today and start living united. So you heard it here, folks. Twitter will be the least influential member of the social media game. Big picture, long term down the road. Really love that quote, Amanda. I when I heard you say it, I got to self admit here, I was taken aback by it. It just that's such a counter to what you hear people talk about, and to have such positivity, but also a realistic look at it. It was incredibly refreshing.
Well, what I think a lot of people miss, unless you create a lot of content, you don't realize. But I do think it subconsciously plays into things for people. You look at social media on your phone. It is literally at arm's length. You cannot be further from the content than the distance you can hold your phone. Think about how intimate that makes the content that you're looking at, and how intimate it makes the way you're viewing. And then you can talk to people, and people answer back, and you get a real voice and a real person. It's not you're not looking at it through the wall of a television, or a producer is choosing the pieces that you see. And that's why I think ultimately it's going to shape how we think about things. It's going to shape what we do in the at the voting booth. It's going to shape the conversations you have at dinner, and ultimately that's going to lead to change. And part of that is that you can only be 36 inches from it. And it does play in. It feels real in a way that your television on the other side of the room simply can't.
No, absolutely. It's really funny. I wish you had seen my show notes before, Amanda. I actually asked, I had typed the question, do you think something else will emerge? And you answered that question without me asking it. So that was awesome. Well, again, that was our One Must Go segment. But then this is our what has become one of my favorite segments. It's something I launched on my birthday late last year in October, and has become easily one of my audience's favorite segments. We really we are spotlighting a charity or nonprofit of my guest choice each week, and as always, I've pledged, my wife and I have pledged to donate to every charity that comes across. So we're pleased. Later tonight, I'll be making a donation in your honor, Amanda. So thank you very much for the opportunity to do so. But this is a great organization that you brought in. I was really excited about it. I and self-admittedly, I knew of it but not as much as I did until you brought it up. And so I'm eager to learn more about thoughts on it from your perspective and everything. But that, of course, is the organization is Women for Women International. And I know you're going to go into greater detail here, but this organization obviously is fantastic at supporting women from around the world. With unless I'm mischaracterizing in my understanding of it, very specifically in a lot of war-torn countries.
Yes.
From around the world. So you're talking about Afghanistan, Bosnia, Democratic Republic of Congo, Kosovo, Nigeria, Iraq, Rwanda, as I mentioned earlier, and South Sudan, just to name a few. But Amanda, I'm gonna put down the mic for a second, and I'm actually I'm still here, but I'm gonna just step away for a second because I want the sole focus on the chair to be here, Charity and the floor to be yours. Please tell my audience why this was so important to you, and what it is about this organization that you feel called to talk about tonight.
Well, first, Bear, I just want to thank you and your wife. You produce a show a week, and to allow your guests to put a spotlight on charities that are near and dear to their heart is an incredible thing. I mean, you give a platform, to all of us to be able to share them with your audience, but then you also donate money. And so, you really are putting your dollars there too. And, I just want to say how incredible I think that is. And so, thank you for that. I think it really speaks to, the kind of person you are, and also just the kind of people that the cigar community is. And it's a really, again, it makes me very proud to be part of this community. And so thank you for that. Women for Women International, it's what I like about what they do is their focus is not just on charity in the sense of, going to a place or people in need and making sure they have essentials, and they certainly do that. But their core focus is really on also providing the tools people need to be able to, lift themselves up and move on with their life after, they've been in a conflict-torn country. And so, they focus on places where people have, really lost their homes, their livelihoods, and they try to prepare them, through vocational education, small business loans, things like that, to be able to start a new life. And, I think that's a very, very powerful thing. I also think it's interesting, they focus on women, and they choose to focus on women because they've done a lot of research, and what they've discovered, especially in, in third world countries and countries that have, are really sort of repressed, is that when you focus on women, the entire country benefits, because women do still oftentimes care for, children. By focusing on women and women's education and making sure that they're stable, the entire country ends up having more food, more money, more stability. It lifts the whole world up. And if you also, there's a woman who actually leads the World Bank, and she, with her channels has sort of discovered the same thing, and they go in and do a lot of loans to women, because overwhelmingly, if you lift women up, the entire country is lifted with it. And that's really where Women for Women International comes in. And I also like that you can donate to the charity as a whole. You can also sponsor a woman. And, I've been fortunate enough to have sponsored several sisters. And you end up in a pen pal relationship with these women. And you really see, they always pair you with somebody who's just entering the program, and you're with them until they kind of graduate. And you really see how on day one, in many cases, they are newly found themselves without a home, or, in a very difficult situation. And they're just trying to, find their footing again. And then through the programs that the Women for Women International puts together, you really see them oftentimes really emerge as a much stronger person and kind of ready to take on the next chapter of their life. And so I like the personal aspect of it, in addition to, the big picture change that they're able to make.
Thank you so much, Amanda. I'm actually going to be putting the link in the chat right now here in just a moment. But before I do, like, I think that was one of the things that I thought was really, a lot of these organizations, worldwide charities and things like that, they speaking of big picture, they do kind of focus on the global thing, and what certainly Women for Women International is a global movement, but it starts with the one person. You can sponsor a woman, a person, and that's unbelievable. And something else you said just grabbed my attention, which was um, when when you uplift a woman or you uplift women, you uplift an entire country. And I I couldn't agree more. Because as you were kind of talking about in our the start of our show, women are changing. I feel like like if we look at the course of history over the last even 100 years, women have changed society continuously. And there's this constant, like, they talk about the women's revolution, the right to vote and all that other stuff. I mean, but that wasn't even, first of all, that wasn't even the beginning. But second of all, like, it didn't stop there. Women have continued to revolutionize society. And the fact that there's an organization like this that is kind of spurring whatever the next revolution will be, if that's fair.
Yeah, no, I think what they do, it's an incredible organization, and it's also a fun to participate in because you truly see how your time and your donation affects people. And so it's you can't ignore it, and there's wonderful. I mean, the Red Cross is incredible, and they do awesome things. But it's easy to send your check and kind of forget what's next. And this is much harder because they make it much more personal in a really good way.
No, absolutely. So, was it, and I may have missed this part, like, have you been active with this organization for a really long time? Has it, or has it been
I
a
mean,
more recent thing?
no. It's been a friend of mine introduced me to them probably a decade ago, maybe a bit longer. Um, and I remained active throughout. I just think what they do is very special. And you do create a bond with your sister. And it's awesome when they kind of graduate and they don't need your sponsorship anymore, and you get to choose to sponsor somebody else. And they've helped a lot of women. But and they do, you get letters from the person you sponsor, but then they also provide you with statistics and things in the region that you're helping. And they're not pushy, but they just stay very present in making sure that you are aware of the change you're helping make, but also the change that still needs to happen.
It's really awesome. I can't imagine how rewarding that is, from the aspect of an adult. Because I remember as a youth, in my teenage years, our church youth group sponsored a child,
Yes.
in one of these charities, and we've got updates from him, and it was it was incredible, from to see that from a child's perspective. I can't imagine how rewarding it is to hear from a fellow adult the impact that you've had on their life and their reality.
Well, and one of the things that's most interesting is, again, because you're sponsoring women, oftentimes, they are, you know, find themselves in a very difficult situation and they have kids. And so you not only start to understand what they're going through and the decisions they're making, and how they're trying to, create a new life, and go to these, programs and things, but they're, very thoughtfully thinking about their children and the sort of the next generation as well. And so it resonates.
Great organization. And I did throw it in the chat, everyone. So if you do feel called to donate to such a fantastic organization, thanking Amanda for bringing it to our attention, allowing us to spotlight it tonight, just to a wonderful organization, wonderful opportunity to just be a part of something, frankly, unlike anything else out there. And just being able to uplift an individual person, but to have it have a global impact is, it's just something incredible. I'm excited to be able to talk about it tonight. So thank you so much for
Well,
spotlight.
thank you for the opportunity.
So, kind of moving into the next couple of things, I wanted to talk a little bit more about current events. We talked about what I coined the COVID pivot for Micallef, but it didn't stop there. You guys, kind of became this very constant, conscious thing for the cigar media and for the cigar consumer with this pivot that you guys made and all the content you created. But even before that, you before COVID was even a word in our vernacular, Micallef put forth a mission statement, and you published it. Basically, not to over the top, but it was basically a manifesto about what you guys were going to be about, the focus that you were going to take. When y'all pulled out of the trade show of 2020, which and everyone ended up doing anyway because it never happened, but you centered it not around that single action, but around this global picture of this stance and this movement that you as a company were going to make going forward. And one of those things, and I'm inverting the subjects tonight, so we're going to go with the most recent event. One of those was your commitment to brick and mortar,
Yes.
which you hear a lot of companies talk about, and a lot of companies do deliver on that promise. I'm not disparaging other companies here, but you all really took this to a different level and a different level of commitment. And earlier this year, you severed a partnership with Cigars International. But this week, another thing in that kind of realm happened where a cease and desist order or letter. I said order. I said that twice now. A cease and desist letter was sent to uh, a online provider, to stop selling your product. Just giving you a little bit of the floor here, Amanda. What was the what was what was the cause of this to transpire, and then ultimately, what is some of the feedback that you've gotten from your consumers, being the retailer, the brick and mortars, and ultimately your consumers, which are customers as a whole?
Um, yes. So, you know, we made a decision really we published a letter in January of 2020, which you sort of referred to. But prior to that, a decision was made at the company around how we wanted to invest, both time and dollars, and what we really felt was the future for Micallef, but also the future of the cigar industry. And we were fortunate in that Al and Dan both have a really vast experience in a lot of different businesses. And both of them believe very strongly, and I share this belief, that if your partners aren't healthy, you can never be healthy. Growing up, one of the things I heard most consistently from my dad was, if you're in a business where you're making money on the backs of other people, you're in the wrong business. And, what he meant by that is if you're abusing the people that either work for you or work with you to the point that they're hunched over carrying the weight of your business, that's not a good business. It's ultimately going to fail. That you really want to create a business that everybody is standing shoulder to shoulder and moving forward together. And we took a step back and we really looked at the trade show model, and we looked at e-commerce and brick and mortars and even direct to consumers. And we really thought, what makes for the healthiest business? And therefore, ultimately, what's going to help Micallef grow? And this was not a hard decision. It was incredibly clear that without our brick and mortar partners, there is no cigar business. And the thing that's kind of most fascinating to me now, looking back, especially ending what I hope is the end of COVID finally, and a year of this, is we got a really good look this year on what the world would be like without our brick and mortar partners. A lot of places were forced for their, lounges and things to close. And, people found themselves smoking home alone or on virtual hearths. And I think the virtual space is awesome, but you still want to be able to have the option to engage with people. And without our brick and mortar partners, even with COVID going away, we would be forever in that same space. If you couldn't have a lounge to smoke at, you're smoking in your garage or on your porch, or if you're fortunate enough to have, a well-ventilated home in your home, but and you're engaging with your fellow smokers virtually. And that's not a world that I want to be in forever. And, and it's a great example of that's what will happen if we don't make sure that we support our brick and mortar partners who fight tirelessly with, county and city and state regulations to make sure that we have a place to go and smoke. And so, we really were passionate about this idea that, brick and mortars are the backbone of the industry. They are the soul and our lifeblood. And in order for them to, continue to be there to provide this service, they have to be healthy. And the way to make sure they're healthy is to provide them with price protection. And the best way to do that is to make sure that somebody can't undersell them online. And so, we've made a very conscious decision that we're only going to work with online retailers that also have a brick and mortar store, because they overwhelmingly price things in a way that, also works for brick and mortar because they have one. And so they don't undercut, the established prices by the manufacturer. And so, we made that choice. We had a long negotiation with Cigar International and Scandinavian Tobacco, and we ultimately ended up parting ways with them. And moved forward from there. And recently, a online retailer, purchased our cigars from a third party and put them online. We reached out to them and asked to have a conversation, and sort of explained that we don't, sell and don't have authorized retailers that are only online. And we'd love to talk to them about how we might find a resolution that works for both parties, including purchasing back the inventory from them. And they didn't engage with us. They would not have a conversation. And so, left with no other decision, we did send them a cease and desist letter. And, our retail partners, it was overwhelmingly positive. I think for the most part, consumers were very pleased with that decision. I think there was some confusion. The retailer that was selling our things online also has a subscription box service. We are huge advocates of subscription boxes. We think that's an awesome way for people to discover new cigars. Mm-hmm. We are in no way against their subscription box service or others. That just doesn't happen to be how we were engaging with them, or how they were choosing to engage with us. And our cease and desist wasn't at all going into the subscription box service or anything like this. It was solely their e-com model. And for the most part, it was great. Not everyone is going to like every decision you make. And so some people who, felt that, we made the wrong call, I not to be blasé, I'm okay with that. If doing the right thing was easy, everybody would do it, right? I mean, so if, it is tough. Am I disappointed that, somebody maybe read that press release and decides they don't want to be a Micallef customer? Of course, on a small level, but I would be far more disappointed if we didn't, stand up for what we said we were going to. And if Micallef Cigar says something, I hope people know that they can take that to the bank. We stand by the things that we say, and you can always count on us to back those things up. And I think this week was an example of that.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that was my biggest observation, is that, I mean, whatever your opinion of your position is, I think even the most negative person towards it has to commend the fact, or at least have to acknowledge the fact, that you are standing up for exactly what you said. that you all were going to do.
You know, I think most people are there. I think, you know, Cigar International purchased and their and you know, their family of brands, they purchased cigars from us when we were still prior to us making this decision. Some of those are still in their portfolio and they're selling through them. And so I think it's confusing to some people because they feel like they see us for sale, and we will be until they sell through that inventory. And so, you know, I think some people felt like we were saying one thing and doing another, which isn't the case. But it's hard when you're a consumer and you don't necessarily see the whole picture to understand that that's just, you know, latent inventory that they're almost sold out of, thank goodness.
Well, the difference is you and Cigars International had the conversation, and you gave them the choice. Either we can purchase the product back or you can continue to sell it, but that'll be the end of it. And they took the latter. And that's, but again, there's that conversation that was present. And, you know, there's no reason to be coy on this. It's perfectly public now. It's Pravada Cigar Club is the one that was, you know, issued the cease and desist letter. And there was no conversation that took place. And I think the thing that I'd like to focus on from a purely subjective point of view is that for the people who may have taken this not the way that y'all intended it, I think the most important fact in this conversation is the fact that there was a pursuit, multiple pursuits of conversation with their leadership to try and resolve this to where this didn't happen. And
absolutely.
Because I mean, as much as like you said, it's been a positive feedback as well, there still has been some negative feedback. And you know, I don't think I'm speaking out of turn here and saying that I think y'all didn't want to have to go this route because of, well, you fully expected positivity, but you probably expected some negativity as well. And surely there's positivity and negativity on the other side of the coin too. So it just brings something public that could have been settled privately. And I think that's probably what I would hope that most people need to take away from this. This wasn't move one by Micallef Cigars.
Absolutely not. That's it. You're exactly right. You know, we would certainly have hoped to resolve it prior to having to take this step, you know, but again, at the end of the day, if we go to a retail partner and we ask them to invest in Micallef by purchasing our products, the least we can do for them is stand behind what we promised. And if we ask somebody to get on the phone or have a conversation and they won't, we would be doing a disservice to our partners to not take that extra step and go, you know, to make sure that we resolve this in the way that we promised our retail partners that we would. And so, you know, I'm sorry that there are people that are disappointed, but you know, I know everybody at Micallef sleeps well at night knowing that, you know, we stood up and did what we said we were going to do. And, you know, I hope we don't find ourselves in this situation again. But the truth is, if we do, we will make the same decision. You know, we will always follow through on our work.
Yeah, and I don't want to speak for retailers, but I'll speak candidly from my position that, you know, again, agree or disagree with your letter from, you know, over 12 months ago. You know, if I'm going to go into a partnership with you, I know you're going to do exactly what you said you're going to do. And I don't think any businessman or woman should expect less.
Agreed.
Food for thought.
Agreed.
Just my 2 cents. So let's go back a little bit further. So this past week was International Women's Week. So it kind of coincides with our entire conversation. Like I was telling you and Dan, who I was speaking with earlier this week too, the last 14 days have kind of wrote most of the interview tonight, which was just fantastic. And you guys decided to honor women specifically with a special edition release, which I mentioned very quickly at the very top of this show when we were talking about what we were smoking, and that was the Migdalia special edition. And I kind of go back to Carlito Fuentes' quote from that panel, you know, making cigars for people. And this isn't the Migdalia SE is not it's not a cigar that you know that can be stereotyped or pigeonholed into a women's cigar. This is something a lot different. So talk about why this blend this brand, why you decided to honor women in this particular way.
So the impetus goes back to before I was at Micallef Cigars. Al and Alan, who's the president of the factory of Micallef Cigars SA, which is our factory in Nicaragua, have gotten to know the Gomez Sanchez family well, who blend our legacy cigars. Migdalia is the matriarch of that family. She is a very prolific and very well-known roller, born in Cuba, studied at the, in Havana, actually toured the world representing Cuba, and ultimately, like many Cubans, left the country. And Dad wanted to honor her with a blend, and he asked her to blend a cigar that would carry her name. And she blended the original Migdalia, which is a 4x46, and the subsequent sizes. We have a 6x46 and we have a Toro, and it's become a very, very popular cigar. Mm-hmm. It happens to be a favorite of mine, and I think it's a very special thing that it carries, her name. And when we started really thinking about how we wanted to, continue to grow the Micallef line and the brand pillars, if you were, the things that were important to Micallef, women obviously have been a very big part of that. And so it became a really natural extension to think about how we could shine a light on the women in the cigar industry, but also women worldwide. I think that every woman in America is very lucky compared to women in many other countries. And that's, not something that, I think a lot of us really even can understand the hardships that, people in many countries, but particularly women, deal with every day. And so the idea, and I've always been a fan of International Women's Day for that reason, because I think the idea of it isn't just about celebrating women, but it's actually really about remembering that we have sisters worldwide that aren't as progressive as the United States and don't have the opportunities that we all have, and that they won't until the whole world sort of comes together and decides that all people should be equal. And so, when we started thinking about how we wanted to bring more women into the cigar conversation and how we wanted to recognize women, we knew that we really didn't want to go down the path of creating a woman's cigar, or, think about designing something that would be the right size or flavor for women, because, cigars are for everybody and people can all smoke the same things. So how do you start a conversation about more women smoking and, spotlight the important role that women have played in cigars, and but at the same time, not create a woman's cigar? And we were really fortunate because the idea was right there. It was, let's, take an opportunity on International Women's Day to spotlight this incredible woman that we are fortunate enough to work in, but also all women everywhere. And so we decided to release a special edition of the Migdalia blend in a new size, and really dedicate the release to strong women. And, the thing, that I really want to make sure we underscore is that when we say strong women, we mean basically all women, whether you're a mother, a frontline worker, an executive. I mean, strong women are everywhere. They're your sister, they're your best friend, they're your wife, they're your girlfriend, they're your teacher. And so we just really wanted to take a minute on this really important day, on a month that's really about women's history, and, appreciate all that they do for all of us. And so that's really what the Migdalia SE is about for Micallef, is about celebrating, the strong women in our life. And I hope that people will buy it and smoke it and take a minute to think about the strong women in their life, and, maybe call their mom or their sister or their best friend and thank them, for the contributions that they play every day.
I was really pleased when I saw this press release, and I was really, because I really like the Migdalia story specifically, and how you guys have really taken ownership of the story and produced a cigar that kind of aligns the spirit of what she stands for, which is really, it sounds, obtuse a little bit, but at the same time, the way that y'all went about this particular line of cigars, you introducing it, Vitola is very, very, conservatively. Speaking about the breadth of your portfolio earlier, when you're saying, here 3 years into it, you guys have like 42 SKUs and it's just this massive animal. But the Migdalia was a very, very special project from the very beginning and has continued to be such. So when I saw this, I was personally really pleased by it. And
Thank you.
and it was something that I know you guys find very special and should be very proud of.
Thank you.
Something that I also really, I guess you did to coincide with this event, was a roundtable that you led recently, which of other women in this industry. So you hosted a women's roundtable of Smoke and Nicole, Cigar Vixen, Meg Zaney, who is actually the person who interviewed you, and a number of times I've quoted you tonight, was one of the interviews I got from. So great interview that she did of you, and then Connie Allen as well.
Yes.
Really, really nice spectrum of women, and Meg's not in the industry, so per se, but it was a really nice spectrum of thought and insight that I found really good, really, really interesting and fascinating. What was when you assembled this panel, for lack of a better term, what was your goal inherently, and what did you ultimately think of the little project that you put together?
So, one of the things that I wanted to convey when we released the SE is that we're taking a moment today on International Women's Day to release a cigar, but this is really the kickoff of a much bigger conversation for Micallef, and I hope for the industry. And so, we wanted to go far beyond this week, this month, even this year. And so the idea of the roundtable was to start kind of officially the conversation, but it will be the first of many conversations that you're going to find on Micallef various content. And some will be one-on-one conversations, some will be other roundtables. That was a great group of people, many of whom were newer on their cigar journey, and that was sort of by design, probably partly because you tend to align with the people that are in a similar place as you, and I really wanted to start with people who could still remember what it was like for them when they started, or at least be familiar with, as a female cigar smoker or a female consumer, the good and bad of what you may be facing or met with. And then, the conversation is going to evolve, and we'll talk to, more women that have been in the industry longer and how they've seen it evolve over time and things like that. And so when I started putting the panel together, I was trying to think of, women that are in similar places to some degree, but also different. And so, you have Cigar Vixen, who's one of the, has sort of some of the most breadth as an influencer. Mm-hmm. And then Smoke and Nicole, who's, new to smoking in the grand scheme of things, even newer than I realized.
Her timeline aligns with yours.
Very much. I think Connie is a fascinating story at AME, because in many ways she really made a decision to purchase a lounge before she smoked a cigar, which I think is so cool. I mean, talk about just jumping into the deep end. And then, Meg was a really specific choice because she was interested in what I was doing, and we had been talking about cigars for a while, but she hadn't smoked a cigar yet until about a week before the panel we got on FaceTime and spoke. But, she left a very traditional job as a headhunter to pursue an art career. And, that in itself was a leap, but she went into street art, which is a very, very male-dominated world. And I thought she'd bring a really unique perspective, as a woman in a different kind of guys club, if you will, to the conversation. And it was a really fun conversation to have because, I think everybody shared the idea that cigars are for everyone. A lot of, the people, Connie, owns the AME, but obviously her husband is a huge role in it. Her two sons-in-laws are a big part of it. Cigar Vixen's mother and grandmother smoked, her husband smokes, Nicole is on smoking tobacco with Matt. So I didn't want to put together a group of women that were like so focused on women smoking that they were anti-guy either, because I think what we're trying to do is create a world in which the community is enjoying each other and smoking together.
Right.
Or, I mean, it's great to smoke with your girlfriends or smoke with your guys, but it is very, very important that no part of this conversation that we have this year that's very pro-women is anti-man. And so, especially to kick off the conversation, I did want to make sure I put together a group of women that I knew the conversation would be around and supportive of women without going down a path that could ever go toward negativity or anti-man, because that's the opposite of what we're trying to do. And I think that sort of was, part of how we thought about that initial group. And it was a fun conversation, but I got to be real, as much as I love talking to them and it was awesome, I can't wait to continue the conversation with more women, and I think that everyone's going to bring a unique perspective to the table.
I'm equally as excited, I have to say. And that's I can't stress that with enough sincerity. An interesting question, because we were talking about with your history with arsenic and how you've kind of brought that with you to Micallef cigars, and again and I think you just pinned it perfectly, because that was another point you brought up in an interview with Meg, and another interview that I listened to as well, is and for no time in all these minutes and hours that I've listened to you talk about women empowerment and empowerment in general, has it ever come across to me as anti-man? And you were very much a feminist. You said it yourself. You're very much a feminist. And I think that those two titles, anti-man and feminism, they're not mutually exclusive, right? There are certainly feminists who are anti-man, and there's certainly anti-man people that aren't feminists. Although probably not as much. But Jay Davis actually brought up this question that I wanted to pen to you, because I think you actually answered this question in one of the interviews I gave. But I want him to hear it, and I want my audience to hear it as well. His question to you is this: his thoughts on today's culture in the U.S. is that we seem to be very woke, which is the term, about a lot of issues, but our movies and magazines continue to sexualize women and demean them. As a father of daughters, this is Jay talking, this infuriates him. So what's your take as a successful businesswoman?
So it exists, there's no question. An interesting thing that I think a lot of times gets brushed over when we're having a conversation about the sexualization of women is there is an idea that women absolutely don't ever want to be sexualized, and that is only a male perspective. And in my experience, women are on every spectrum of the chart, that there are many women who are happy to own their sexuality, and they choose to do that in a public way, and they want to do that. And as a woman and as a feminist, I hugely support that decision, as long as it's coming from a woman's desire and a woman's choice. There is this idea in content creation kind of around the male gaze. And, the male gaze is really about the idea of what is sexual or sexualized in a woman through the eyes of a man. And that's where I think that, where things can go very wrong very fast, when it's solely about what does a man find sexual as opposed to what does a woman find empowering. And so I think that as long as the content and the choice is coming from a place of the woman feeling empowered and powerful, I have no issue. The hard thing for a consumer is it's a very subtle difference sometimes when you're looking at something. To
very fine line.
Is that coming from a woman's choice? Is she choosing to do that? Or is that, something that's by design of a man? And, having this conversation a lot for arsenic, the thing that, I find the most astounding is that I never had a conversation with a man that I was directly talking to, certainly there's comments in social medias and things where the man was insulting or disrespectful toward the woman who was being provocative in an image. I was hugely offended on multiple occasions by women. And the thing that would be so interesting to me is that when women dislike the content on Arsenic, the comments they would make are things like, well, why is she doing this? She's doing it for herself or for attention. You know, and if I would bring up Diana Patrick doing a very sort of sexual pun-like thing for GoDaddy, they would be like, well, or a Coca-Cola ad, you know, where there was a model being very provocative, and they would, well, that's fine. She's doing that because she's selling something. They're paying her. She's selling a brand. And for some reason, for a lot of women, it's okay for women to be provocative in service of a Fortune 500 company. But for a woman to choose to be provocative for herself was somehow considered negative or bad. And that's the thing that blows my mind. And, you know, I would try to say to fathers of daughters is to dispel that idea that no woman should ever be sexy or provocative for any reason other than in service of themselves. And if what you want to do is do that Coca-Cola ad and that makes you happy, by all means. And if you want to go on your Instagram and you truly feel empowered being in your bikini, by all means. The minute it stops being for you and it starts being for somebody else is when the problems begin. And you know, it's a fine line and it's a hard conversation to have, because again, how does a consumer know? And having created countless hours of, you know, what many people would call sexy or provocative content, there's a subtle difference. And you can, you know, you look carefully, you can almost always see it in a woman's eyes when she's owning that image and when she feels great, as opposed to when somebody else is telling her what to do and it's just not there. And I don't know if that answers Jay's question, but you know, it just really, really comes around to making sure that all women know they have a choice and that they have options available to them. So if they're, you know, that they don't feel that they're backed into a corner and making a decision, you know, because that's how they need to pay the rent, as opposed to this is my choice and this is what I want to do.
No, and I think you pointed out this earlier in the evening when you were talking about when you know, very politely put it, you asked a photographer to leave because he wasn't about that culture that you were creating, which was about the woman deciding, or in this case, let's take women out of it for 2 seconds, the subject, right, of the exactly. Photo to they didn't have the choice. They weren't being empowered. They were being told in this case. So Jay mentioned great points, and I completely echo that sentiment. I think that's, you know, it is a very fine line, and the fact that you acknowledge it too is also is equally transparent in the fact that it is difficult for a consumer of content of that nature, or any nature for that matter, to understand it. And I think with that understanding, it makes with that understanding, even though it's difficult, it makes that understanding easier. As confusing as that may sound, but I think I made a point. So that kind of goes into the last question of the evening, Amanda, and that very easily. So Jay provided a great segue for me, so appreciate that, Jay. And this is the time of the night where, Amanda, I always thank my guests. It's unbelievable to me that my guests every week dedicate family time, because Sunday, you know, even in the era of COVID, Sunday is family time, and there are things that you'd rather probably be doing, getting ready for Monday, for example. It is a work week, so but for you to give me the amount of time that you have tonight, I just can't thank you enough. This has been an incredible conversation. Thank you so much for your time. Well,
again, I've had a great time, and you know, thank you for letting me come on and talk about so many things that I'm very passionate about.
It's my pleasure. So this is my curveball question. So it kind of goes hand in hand with a little bit of what Jay was talking about, what we have talked about tonight. Okay. Now, other than the obvious, how would Amanda Micallef have influenced the things that she has influenced in your career that has spanned a broad spectrum. How would it be different, or would it be different if you were a man?
Well, I think if I was a man, I think it'd be incredibly different if I was a man. Part of what I've been able to do, with arsenic and elemental, and I hope now, talking about launching, a whole conversation around women with cigars. As a man, I don't know that I would have had. I don't know that women would have put the trust in me that they have. A really important thing, as I started to recognize, that a lot of women are put in uncomfortable positions trying to create content or trying to build their career, is to create a safe space where they could, explore the kind of content or try new things and do it, in a way that they knew somebody had their back. And though I do believe men can build that trust with women, I think, when women are going out of their comfort zone, whether it's smoking a cigar or deciding to take a more provocative picture, that they may want to take, but knowing that there's another woman there and present, does provide some, sense of security. And I don't know that, in truth, no matter, you could be the most woke guy out there, I don't know that you can truly ever understand, as a woman, what it feels like to be on a set and have somebody, asking you to pose in a way that doesn't make you comfortable, or even walk into a cigar lounge where 95% of the people are men, and you walk in and every single set of eyes looks at you. And you can acknowledge those things happen, but it's hard to really understand what that feels like. And so I think, that being a woman, but having many of the very fortunate things that, have happened to me, and just the incredible position I've been put in, and to have, a great dad like I have, or the support of somebody like Dan, I could be very, very comfortable, and then try to take my security and help create a more secure space for other women.
I have to, to conclude tonight's show, Amanda, what I have to applaud and I have to recognize is, and this term is very apropos considering the subject of tonight. And as we mentioned earlier, the slew of icons, influencers, and parts of the very fabric of the engine that make the cigar industry go are women. And you've become a fantastic ambassador for them. And I've become, this, it may sound over dramatic, but I've become so much in awe of your role in such a short time and what you've been able to accomplish, not just for women. Let's not compartmentalize it just like that, but what you've been able to accomplish in the short time that you've been a part of this industry is something that really truly should be revered. And I can't thank you enough for your time tonight, and thank you for the service that you've done. I can't wait to see what's in store for Micallef here in the future, and for yourself as well. It's just been truly fantastic.
Well, thank you. And again, people like you and Coop, you help all of us amplify our message. And so, we owe you we are in your debt. So thank you.
Certainly my pleasure. Well, everyone out there, I thank you so much for your time tonight. Thank you to our audience, all of your likes and shares and comments. This has been everything in the conversation that I've wanted to and more. It certainly seems like our audience has certainly enjoyed it. So thank you for all your likes, shares, and comments. If you are a fan of the show, be sure to check out our YouTube page, which is ELOSOFUMAR. You can download, subscribe, and review from there. You can also check out our upcoming guest list, which will be published here later this week on our Facebook page. We've got some great takes coming up. And if you are listening to this show later, or wherever you listen to podcasts, whether that be on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, Podbean, or iHeartRadio, or wherever you listen to podcasts, be sure you download, subscribe, and review. And if you already are a subscriber, please do me a favor, unsubscribe, but just don't forget to resubscribe, because that helps my numbers. so that I can continue to get amazing and great guests like Amanda this evening. So again, to everyone out there, thank you so much. This was our 160th take. I'm Bear Duplessis, live from the Alec Bradley Lone Star Studios of Euless, Texas. She's Amanda Micallef. Guess what, everyone? We'll see you next time.
Good night. Thank you.